go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Belize. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the afternoon session of day 2 of the Belize KULCHA Symposium. We hope that you enjoyed our morning session where we discussed much about Belize's colonial history and how we are slowly breaking down barriers to decolonize our present approach to Belizean identity. We had a variety of awesome presentations. We had a variety of young, early career researchers, citizen scientists, presenters, and they all brought the culture. A quick housekeeping. Our feed on Facebook was interrupted this morning. So if you did not manage to get all of the day 2 morning session, it won't be available on Facebook for a little bit, but it is on YouTube. So if you want to catch the end of that presentation, go over to YouTube. Our videos are on there, all of our videos from the sessions, and especially the day 1 morning session. We apologize for that. That was a copyright concern that was brought into our Facebook because of the media that was used in one of the presentations, which is fine. That occurs in this day and age. But again, our presentations are on YouTube, so go there if you want to access them. All right, moving on. Heritage Education Network Belize and the entire KULCHA Symposium is volunteer-led. So we are able to bring this symposium to you through the efforts of our network of volunteers and through the kind partnership of our media partners, which include the National Channel and Colorblind Multimedia Limited. So thank you to them. Thank you to our volunteers. And also a quick housekeeping. Please don't forget to support Henby and the KULCHA Symposium by donating to Heritage Education Network Belize. The links are available on their website, and any sort of donation goes a long way into ensuring that we can continue to bring more of these free platforms, this free open source information to you all. Moving forward, this afternoon's first thematic session focuses more on our present day social constructs, how we see food, attitudes, mental health, economic problems, and even water. Yes, water. It's all about the culture. So it is my pleasure to present our first lineup for the afternoon session, which will be Modern Realities and Urbanism. Our first presenter is no stranger to Belizeans, to the media, and to the camera. We welcome Chef Sean Kuylen. Chef Kuylen holds his degree in culinary arts that was earned in San Francisco, California. He also interned at Disney World Orlando, Florida, and worked at resorts in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, and Belize. Over the last 15 years, he has been on a cultural immersion on all things related to people, food, and all things culture. Chef Sean has documented his work on various local and international television and magazine publications, and he continues to be a cultural ambassador for the Belize Tourism Board, traveling to London, Taiwan, USA, and Dubai. And in the next 3 months, he's showcasing his inspired Belizean cuisine. Chef Kuylen approached social media from this raw background. It's impromptu, it is uncut, or what can be called street photography. His work documents and captures an unedited and authentic angle to his Belizeans and Caribbean brothers. And for a more edited version of this outlook on food and culture and Belize, be sure to check out Glazed Out on the National Channel that also features Chef Sean Kuylen. And without further ado, we introduce our first presentation.
Let's go our journey through Belize, a land of sweet people, nice food, and diverse culture. But so the landscape changes from coral and reefs to forests and mountains. So will the languages, cuisines, beliefs, and traditions. Hop on this overpacked retired school bus with me, man. Our travel promises to stimulate all the senses, assaulting them with the richness of a country and its people. The logo on the side of this bus is painted Batty Bus, This means we must be in the north, where Mestizo and Maya Yucatec, the descendants of the caste war, are eating pibiles, cabeche, relleno negro, pipián, and relleno blanco. They expertly roll white corn tortillas in the palm of their hands. Immediately, your curiosity is piqued because just 5 hours ago, not James Boss, you saw the Quechua and the Mopan Maya of southern Belize enjoying hot caldo, chucua, lancha, chocolate chipi chapa, and yellow corn tortillas. So you ask yourself, what does the color of the corn have to do with anything? But like any good vineyard in Italy, Spain, or France, the terroir dictates the character, the body, and the sweetness of the grape, just like we Belizean people. Belize's terroir defines a sense of place, dictated by its landscape, climate, and even the elevation above the Caribbean Sea. You confirm this well en route from Belmopan to western Belize, now with the bus painted Shaw on the side. The obese driver fiddles with the analog stereo, tuning it to Radio Belize, as the passenger keenly listens to the 12:30 news and the weather report. You hear different temperatures for islands, inlands, and coasts, which you confirm through the half-open window as the driver maneuvers the curvy road. A weathered-faced Belizean man sat beside me, and he said, "Young man, I dey go home from the weekend. For my days off, I'm a lighthouse keeper at Half Moon Key, one of 4 atolls in Belize." He then started to explain how he studies the moon because it affects fishing, tide, and even his grandfather's profession as a chiclero. Tradition and general wisdom dictates when to harvest bay leaf for thatch roof, when to plant crops, and even when to cut mahogany and logwood. You stare out the window throughout your journey, noticing the soil going from red dirt in the south to compact calcium-rich white marl up north, affecting even the water quality and its hardness, which is ever-changing, just like the diversity of the people as you explore Belize. It is now Sunday. You notice all the stores are closed, and only one lipat liquor can be seen searching for food on the streets countrywide. In the distance, you hear church bell ringing at 9 a.m. You remember reading an article saying that 40% of the population is Roman Catholic. Your attention is drawn to one of the many Asian stores where Belizeans are purchasing defrosted chicken from an unplugged freezer to get home in time for the Sunday dinner. Rice and beans, achiote, red recado stew chicken, and potato salad or coleslaw, and Lyra plantain cooked in a coconut aisle. In the rural villages, they never use the Mennonite chicken, but kill their own, cause it is known that every fat fall has its Sunday. The East Indians, indentured laborers of ex-Confederate sugarcane estates in the deep south, then stew down alikuhun cabbage and a yellow ginger and coconut milk, while the Mennonites celebrate their own Sunday tradition called Faspa. This is a lunch around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Guests are often extended special invitations to come to Faspa, and the menu reflects the hard-working Mennonite farmers with an array of fresh breads and buns, with homemade jellies of the fruits that are in season. They enjoy this with cakes, pies, pickles, cookies, fresh cheeses, and milk from the cows in the yard. Back at the same Chinese shop, you see one man on the floor, still drunk from last night, but he is still intent on getting another flask of bad man and a shilling water to dilute the concoction. The town clock strike 10 o'clock, and by now, Belizeans are glued to their radios awaiting the results of the Sunday Lottery Bolido, formerly known as Panama. Now, everyone has their favorite number. They will buy your age if you fall down, if they're your birthday, if it's your anniversary or a family member's death, or if they dream about an old relative. You buy the number front, way back, where you add and you subtract. In the end, you lose, as per normal, and the winning number was always the same one you were supposed to buy, but you just never get around to do it. Throughout your journey, you come to the realization that Belizeans love a celebration, and everywhere pan the knock, there is people, food, and tradition. For when you're born till when you're dead, and everything in between, Belizeans will celebrate. It is now Christmas Eve. You smell the fresh paint coming from your neighbor's house, and you see them in the hall laying new mali on the floor, but you just can't see the mali pattern and the color because they were careful enough to roll it inside out upon delivery, just because they know you're too bloody interfering. The girls are helping their moms making rompopo, light cake, and black fruit cake with molasses, a tradition of our colonial past. She is instructed to give it 60 clockwise turns using a wooden spoon. She dare not go to 61 or ever stir this thick batter in the opposite direction, as the cake will be ruined. Outside, the boys are grating coconut for the rice and beans on the fire hearth. As night falls, the house is filled with the smell of turkey and ham, fighting for a lead chance to fit in at the small butane oven. You can feel the chill of the north wind blowing in through the rotting wood lice-infested cracks in the walls. And most everyone reeks of campabal, as they're wearing old sweaters stored in barrels sent from relatives in the United States. These same barrels are usually dashed under the house, bearing full bill and receipt, including their names, address, and phone numbers of the occupants in the house. In the Corozal and the Orinjoc districts, the mestizos and the Yucatec Maya are carefully sewing the cavity of their turkey with pork boot and black recado for the traditional pavo in Relleno Negro. These foods are a feast, only ever to be cooked at this time of year or at weddings. And in true fashion, so the landscape change, so will the menu. Weddings is a time for Relleno Negro, turkey with rice and beans, bollos, tamales, caldo of red recado with local fowl, and the cock's head for the special guests of honor in the Quechua and Maya culture. At the stroke of 12 on this chilly December 24th, adults will attend midnight mass, blade up no post back foot, but for many, this is the only time you will ever see them entering this holy building. Oh, and when somebody dead. The radio plays the 1942 version of White Christmas by Bing Crosby, which is totally out of place for our subtropical climate. While the Kriol, Mestizo, and the Maya celebrate with food, the Garifuna of southern Belize display pure culture through music and dance. From Christmas Day straight up to New Year's, the streets will be lined with crowds of people following the drummers as they go house to house asking for a lead donation to perform the Jankuno and the exciting Cherry Canary, where the 2-foot cow lash up the Lee Pictine who are brave enough to taunt him chanting, "Moo moo, no tail." The Garifuna elders, dressed in elegant suits, wigs, and white gloves, where the male and the female waltz the room in a magnificent display of their stately grand ball, adapted from the British tradition. Throughout the country, different genres of music are being performed. In the River Valley of Belize, Kriol bram to Mr. Peter's broke down music with instruments like donkey jabo and turtle shell and a greater. In the south, the Quechua and the Mopan watch the choreographed deer dance with colorful fabric and headdress, and they enjoy the melodious sounds of the Maya harp of Florencio Mes in San Antonio, Toledo. Out west in Benqueviejo del Carmen, they are enjoying the marimba, and in Gales Point, Manatee, samba music drums on throughout the night. Finally, the Garifuna plays paranda, punta, gunje, hugu hugu, wanaragua, and Cherry Canary pulsates the replicating sounds of the heartbeat. Death in Belize is also a time for celebration where food and drink is customary. The mestizos Belario and the Garifunas Beluria or wake are usually well attended by family members and friends. True coffee attend the wake not because of knowing the man were dead, but for the food. Johnny cake with cheese, hot coffee, tamales, bollos, sandwich, and in the Garifuna culture, warm saho and lasos tuguri gallo, chicken foot soup. Don't forget the dominoes, the gambling, and the rum. They say you wake me hype if you had a musical band perform sounding like a celebration versus a time of mourning. For an even more spiritual experience, the Garifuna goes on to celebrate death in 9 nights and the Dugu, where the spirit of the dead can enter the living. The Yucatec Maya offers food to the dead on October 31st in their traditional Hanapishan, translating to food of the spirits. Similarly, the Mestizos celebrate the Dia de los Muertos, reuniting the living and the dead, offering the foods and drink on altars lined with burning candles. My favorite Dia de los Muertos offering by my grandmother was the Maja Blanca, a thickened rice porridge sweetened with condensed milk and canela. But folkloric Belizean tradition say, don't you dare have a pregnant woman stir that pot, or it will not thicken. Oh, and if the tree in your yard can't produce, have one virgin beat it so it can bear fruit. And if your beans and meat tough, cook it with one nail. And everyone at Hopkins and Kikaka know the only way to tell if a barracuda has the ciguatera toxin is to cook it with a silver spoon. If the spoon get rusty, it means it's poisonous. And if you go to bush that night, tuck your thumb away to avoid Tata Duende or the infamous La Sucia, Xtabay.ay, Llorona, and Bra Nancy, and the infamous Jackie Vasquez. Kriol people say, crab walk till kiss kiss ketcha. One day belly full no fat maga dog. Kettle the cost pot black. And hardy expect they gonna market 2 times. They say vervine good for cure COVID-19. And if you can't get your lady pregnant, brah, drink seaweed, palo de hombre, contribo, and jackass bitters. It is now a new year. You are impressed by the diversity and the cultures of Belize. You decide to take a lead trip to the Keys on a water taxi. It is now February and you head to San Pedro, where they're celebrating comparsas de carnaval, where crowds flock to the street as male dancers dressed in female clothing, dancing and singing to the latest scandal in the community. Remember, now wear your best clothing, as it is likely that you will be covered in paint, powder, flour, and even burnt 4-stroke outboard and golf cart engine oil. It is now March. This means the kite season. In Belize, the weather is either wet or dry, and this time of year is known for its delicious, refreshing southeast winds, which also fills the sail of the annual Easter Regatta in Gales Point, a peninsula of maroon Creoles. As we enter September, soca music dominates the airwaves as Belize City prepares for Carnival, where elaborate and colorful costumes and dancers parade miles of road as onlookers line the streets of the old capital. Not forget to mark your calendar with cultural and food festivals. We got Fiesta Ramada Orinjua, Benke Fiesta, National Agriculture and Trade Show Belmopan, Spanish Lookout Day, 19th of November in the south, Sidewalk Art Festival in Placencia, Expo in Belize City, San Joaquin Fiesta, Costa Maya and Burgess Key, and the Battle of the Drums in Punta Gorda. Every month is also a celebration for food. Let me tell you, there is Mango Fest, Lobster Fest, Rum Fest, Yellow Ginger Fest, Cashew Fest, Tilapia Fest, Taco Fest, Coconut Fest, and Chocolate Fest. And if that's not your cup of tea, then enjoy Belize's over 150 islands and keys, 180 miles of living barrier reef, and over 600 Mayan sites and counting. Throughout your journey, you will notice the remnants of traditional colonial-style buildings along with the contemporary concrete structures. But to date, the tallest man-made building in Belize is still Mayan temples towering the clouds while tucked inside deep rainforests and the jungle. Our national anthem states that nature has blessed us with wealth untold. However, Belizeans are oftentimes described as being lazy, laid-back, and talentless. The colonial thread woven in our fabric has made us look beyond our borders for foreign ingredients and a way of life, and thinking that everything imported is better to our inferior local traditions, food, and products. After the destructive Hurricane Hattie of 1961, families emigrated to the United States, leaving children behind to be raised by grandmothers, making the customary form of income come by postal order or by filling out a Western Union form versus a day of honest labor. The contraband ring in Stillwell oil, smuggling Mexican beer, vegetables, and even rolls of toilet paper. But you see, the grass is not always greener on the other side. The first thing those same Belizeans living in the diaspora request from home is our very own Red Ricardo, local rum, and Marisha habanero pepper, proving that no matter how far you go from home, connotations and memory of childhood would always set your compass to the motherland. To those students and working Belizeans that are living abroad, return home at the end of your study and at the maturity of your pension. Take advantage of the Qualified Retired Persons Incentive Program. Share your learned knowledge. Help your community. Be an inspiration. Your home awaits you. Make your niche. Don't complain. End the brain drain. I am now starting to feel discouraged. It's been a long, emotionally bumpy ride sitting at the rear of this bus. The sign ahead reads Halacte Toledo. It's now the end of the road, and my journey through Belize must now come to an end. The adventure of 8,867 square miles was exhilarating, stimulating all the senses with the smells, sounds, and sights of a wonderful people and country. The conductor points to the dead, barren, and overclayed forest land in the neighboring Guatemala, far from the lush green where we currently park. To the hill on my left proudly flies my Belize flag, where the Belize Defense Force soldiers keep their watchful eyes scanning the deforested neighboring landscape from their treetops military outposts. I sit still, almost numb, as I watch villagers in their customary colorful Maya attire disembark with their weekly provision of beans, corn, flour, and shortening. I hesitantly walk to the front of the bus, dreadfully looking forward beyond the border to the brown landscape. I feel the weight of my right foot as I step down. My heart races. My mind flashes back to a journey so memorable, so colorful, and one that has literally defined who I am. I clench my hand on the rusty bar and I pull back my feet from the last step down and I shout to the driver, "No sir, vámonos! Make we turn back and explore more of this country's terroir." I make my way back to the seat and the driver releases the brake. A smelly diesel filled the air as he accelerated the whole Cummins engine of this Bluebird bus. Hungry for more, I will continue on my culinary anthropological journey, documenting Belize's people, food, and culture. I am Chef Sean Kuylen. Sereme, Botik, gracias, thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Chef Kuylen. You know, when we received your abstract, I don't think anybody expected you to deliver a presentation that included so much prose and imagery, and was able to really instill or inspire, remind us of all of our culture that we are so proud of in such a illuminary way. So thank you very much for that, Chef Kuylen. I think you shocked a lot of people with that presentation, pleasantly so. So thank you. We move on to our second presentation for the afternoon. We will now introduce Dr. Lyra Spang. Dr. Lyra Spang is a Belizean sociocultural anthropologist who is fascinated by the intricacies of food studies, tourism, and identity. She obtained her PhD in 2014 from Indiana University. Dr. Lyra consults on Belizean cuisine, culinary tourism, and other anthropological matters, and is chair of the research group on gastropolitics, food, and identity at the Open Anthropology Institute. She owns and operates Taste Belize Tours, a culinary and cultural tour company. She is the author of Bite Your Finger, Innovating Belizean Cuisine and Ethnography, tracing the role of tourism in national cuisine formation in Belize. In her spare time, she can be found in the jungle, farming cacao on her family's organic homestead in southern Belize. Dr. Lyra notes that she can husk a coconut in 20 seconds, everyone. You can find her at Academia.edu or email her directly at tastebelize@gmail.com for any questions or collaborations. Please welcome Dr. Lyra Spang's presentation, Bad Mind, Good Mind. What does our obsession with bad mind say about Belize?
Galatians 6 verse 17. Hello bad mind, good morning. No say you never did want see me wake up fi keep talking. Yeah, hello bad mind. How you doing today? How you doing today? Me no wanna change face round me, I just saw me steer. I tell them me no big friend. No, me no running from people. Me stinking link, me stay real too. Me no love likes, me no frightened for money or vehicle. Dirty bad mind, me no need you. Me no big friend. No, me no running from people. Me stinking link, me stay real too. Me no love likes, me no frightened for money or vehicle. I scared good over evil. Me no beg people things. Me no follow back a man. Woulda never beg a dollar, much less beg a gun. Me no see people things and I should bout me and youth. And also me grow and also me program. Bad mind in your head, them off his own it off. Come and give me ginger here, boy. Yo, my boy. Love ya. Pagans now see me falter. Plus friend me no shatter. So, hello bad mind. Good morning. You say you never did want see me wake up to keep talking. Yeah, hello bad mind. How you doing today? How you doing today? Me no wanna change face round me, I just saw me steer. I tell them me no big friend. No, me no running from people. Me stinking link, me stay real too. Me no love likes, me no you never did want see me wait. Me no frightened for money or fee.
More complex set of inevitably having somebody
Me stinking link, me stay.
violent crime rising countrywide, the worst economy in our history, and a global pandemic isolating and depressing our population, bad mind seems everywhere. And even in good times, you can't talk about opportunity, happiness, and success in Belize without inevitably having somebody bring up bad-minded people. Those people who laugh when you fail, who don't want to see you do well, who envy your success and spread negative gossip about you in an attempt to bring you down. This presentation is just a preliminary glance at a term that is connected to a much larger, more complex set of beliefs about human nature. But I hope it will help us to start to think about and perhaps question some of our underlying assumptions about each other in our Belizean society. Bad mind describes someone who is envious, malicious, jealous, and spiteful. According to the 46 responses I collected from posts in 9 Facebook groups all across Belize on August 9, 2021, bad mind is an actively negative mental state, the opposite of wishing someone well. A person with bad mind is envious of the success, achievements, happiness, opportunities of others. A person with bad mind always assumes the worst about people, aka bad mind thinking, and believes others do not deserve the success, happiness, achievements, and opportunities they have gotten. A person with bad mind is malicious and thinks, says, in the form of gossip, or even does negative things to another person or people in order to try to prevent them from having success and happiness. A person with bad mind actively wishes bad for others. And a person with bad mind feels good when the person or people they are bad-minded fails or has something bad happen to them. It is important to note here that most of us have suffered from a case of bad mind at some point. Often when someone is envious of someone else, it's because they're doing something or getting something that we want for ourselves. Maybe we don't have it because we feel unsure of our ability to get it. Maybe we don't have faith in ourselves, so we haven't tried. Or maybe we tried and failed and gave up instead of trying again. Or maybe we are procrastinating on our great idea because we don't know how to start or are afraid, and then feel bad-minded towards someone else who come up with the same idea but put it into action right away. I found this image on Amazon. You can even get your No Bad Mind t-shirt right there and have it shipped to you. So where does this term bad mind even originate? We find this term associated with Kriol populations across the Caribbean basin in former British colonies. In England, the earliest written instance of bad mind is found in the works of Thomas Churchyard, an author and soldier of fortune who lived from 1523 to 1604. This term bad mind is an everyday phrase, not just in Belize, but Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Barbados, Bahamas, all across the region. It does not seem to be common or widespread in Canada or the United States, except to those of Caribbean heritage. Given that this term is associated with Afro-descent populations and former British colonies, I believe there are probably also African roots for the concept of bad mind, but have not been able to verify that so far with this preliminary research. So almost everybody has heard of the evil eye. This concept of evil eye or mal de ojo is found across much of the world, from Japan to Turkey, Brazil, Mexico. It's common in the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries. It's believed that the power of someone's gaze can cause illness and harm to a person and their belongings, including their livestock, their pets, their children. Bad mind, however, is not the same as evil eye. It is distinct from evil eye in one fundamental way. In most cultures and countries where there is belief in evil eye, it is agreed that a person can unintentionally cause the evil eye without meaning to harm. In other words, their gaze may accidentally cause a curse or cause harm, even when their mind wishes the best. Bad mind, on the other hand, requires malicious intention, a negative mental state, hence the term bad mind, on the part of the person who is bad-minding someone else. It requires active negative intention and thus culpability. And that is the major difference between bad mind and this global concept of evil eye. Okay, so it's not evil eye, but what about this new term, haters? Very popular in Belize today, but it originated in the hip-hop scene in the late 1990s in the United States. This term haters, which is short for player hater, was popularized by Notorious B.I.G. And has come to prominence in the late 90s, and up until today it's become very popular as a term. Haters, just like bad-minded people, must be actively jealous or envious of another person or people. In this way, this American hip-hop term, which also comes from Afro-descent populations, overlaps significantly with the Kriol Caribbean term bad mind. Haters are seen as intensified fans. They are basically jealous admirers. As such, they're seen as an inevitable product of success and fame by hip-hop stars today. So basically, if you don't have any haters, maybe you're not as successful in the hip-hop game as you thought you were. So haters, in a way, are a good sign. They're a sign of your success. So we know what bad mind is and what it isn't, and that it requires someone to be envious or jealous of somebody else's happiness and success. What is underlying those beliefs or those thoughts on the part of the bad-minded person? The concept or theory of limited good. This is a belief system that all resources are finite. So if one person gets more of something, there's automatically less for others. This is basically the idea that everything is a pie, and that if I get a bigger slice, you automatically will end up with a smaller slice. There's only so much to go around. This is certainly the case for certain fundamental resources like water and land that are indeed finite. But this theory, this concept of limited good, holds much less true when it's applied to intangible resources like happiness or success in work or in relationships. Bad-minded people are seen as jealous or envious of what someone else has or is in the process of obtaining. I hypothesize that underlying this envy and jealousy is belief in the concept of limited good, not only as applied to land or water or money, but also as applied to the happiness and success in life, love, and work. Believing that there's a limited amount of opportunity, happiness, success in the world. So if somebody else gets an opportunity, success, happiness, or achievement, that it is now no longer available or less available for the bad-minded person. Crab mentality. We're all familiar with this. This is just another form of bad mind. The idea of having envy and jealousy, not wanting to allow somebody to succeed, so we try to pull them back down. That is the epitome of bad mind. So that all those stories about crab in a bucket, crab mentality, Those are all examples of what it means to be bad-minded. So maybe it's biologically hardwired for us to be negative. But does that mean that there's a biological reason for being bad-minded? Psychological research has demonstrated human beings, regardless of cultural background, pay more attention to negative stimuli. When something negative happens, we notice it more than when something positive happens. This is called negativity bias, and it affects all humans. It is believed to be a genetic trait selected for by evolution, so that paying attention to negative things such as a potential threat to your life help humans live longer. So this over attention to the negative was selected for, resulting in a human species that tends to take the positive for granted, but overreacts to anything perceived as negative or a threat. So what does this have to do with bad mind? Bad-minded people, because of their belief in the concept of limited good, believe there are only so many chances for happiness around. Someone else getting an opportunity equals less opportunity for them. Someone else being happy equals less happiness in the world for them. So someone else's success draws their attention not as a positive thing, but as a negative threat. Negativity bias also means that people tend to focus on bad mind and on being bad-minded by others more than they focus on people who are encouraging and supporting them in their efforts. This gives bad mind far more power than it needs to have. While bad mind is a term found across the Caribbean, good mind is a term that does not exist. But does that mean that good mind itself, the idea of being positive towards others, does not exist either? Do we have a term in Belize for some kind of positive mentality? When I asked that question in a Facebook survey posted in groups across Belize, the same groups where I had asked about bad mind, I was surprised how few responses I got. Compared to 46 for bad mind, I only got 6 responses to my question, what would you call someone who is good-minded? How would you describe them? Are there words or terms in Belize that you think we use when talking about good-minded or uplifting people? I did get a few responses. Those 6 responses I have here. Good mind. Someone who is genuine, real, got your back. People also reference conscious roots reggae. They talked about positive vibrations and one love as being a term that represented and encompassed that good mind thinking. But it was really a very small amount of responses, so there's a lot more to look into here. So what does this say about our society here in Belize? What we need to do as people in our Belizean society is stop applying the concept of limited good, the 2 things that aren't actually limited: happiness, success, peace of mind, love. We Belizeans, like all humans, suffer from negativity bias. But if we're aware of it, we can choose to change our focus. If our society as a whole talks about good mind, focuses on positive things and peaceful solutions, we can move away from our nationwide obsession with bad mind, which, while understandable, especially in these difficult times, is not helping us to move forward in a positive way. I also want to clarify that I'm not trying to dismiss or ignore the massive structural inequalities that we have as a nation. Those are real. Those should not be ignored. But the way how we think about each other as we move along through our lives as individuals in our society, that we have much more control over. If we focus on ourselves instead of what others think of us, and we choose to be grateful for what we already have, we can still achieve happiness and feel more positive, not allowing our negativity bias to overreact or misinterpret someone as a threat. Happiness and positivity can have a ripple effect in our communities and society, especially in such a small society as Belize. In conclusion, because we are such a small country with a small population, not even 500,000, we can, through spreading the message of good mind, help to change our perspective, change our brains, leveraging neuroplasticity, the ability to change, actively change the way we think, can allow us to get rid of that overreacted negativity bias and stop applying the concept of limited good to happiness, love, or success in work and social relationships. We can choose on an individual basis and on a social level to be a happier, more peaceful society, starting with changing the way we think about ourselves and each other. And that all begins with neuroplasticity, changing our focus from negative to positive. And there's a lot of roots reggae songs that can help us along the way. And I hope that everyone who's listening to this presentation today, that you will go out there and be part of the Good Mind movement. It would be a wonderful thing for all of us to spread that good mind movement positivity everywhere that we go, being peaceful, positive, and productive citizens, and help to uplift each other, especially in these difficult times. Thank you to the Heritage. Thank you to the Heritage Education Network and everybody involved in the KULCHA Symposium for giving me this opportunity to talk about something I've been thinking about for years. I hope everybody out there will hashtag Good Mind Movement as they move throughout their daily lives. And if you have any questions or want to follow up with me, you can contact me at the email on the screen. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lyra, for that presentation. We are focused on the positive. So, the whole KULCHA Symposium Heritage Education Network believes our volunteer-based efforts, our community engagement. Hopefully, you could see that as part of that Good Mind movement, and that the movement already exists. And we're building momentum. So hashtag Good Mind. Reach out to Taste Belize Tours for your culinary experiences, but for anthropological thoughts and insights on Belize and how we view ourselves, how we vision the world. So thank you very much for that presentation. Moving forward, we have Miss Kristcha Deguerre. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And do correct me when you come on for the question and answer segments. But Ms. Deguerre is a third-year PhD student at the University of Albany at the School of Social Welfare. She studies remotely and lives here in Belize, where her research interests are gang-involved women, mental health, and induced trauma. Previously, she worked as a clinical social worker conducting mental health counseling in some Southside Belize City, and at the Princess Royal Youth Hostel. Her research includes a pilot study titled Gang Involvement, Trauma, and Resiliency in Women in Belize, Trauma-Informed Narrative Interviews. This is the first study that included involved women and serves as the foundation of her larger dissertation research. We had the pleasure of having Ms. Deguerre on our mental wellness series last month, and we are happy to welcome her to our symposium where she will present on gang-involved trauma and resiliency in Belize, trauma-involved narrative interviews.
Deguerre, and I'm here to present my study entitled Risk Factors, Trauma, and Gang Involvement Among Women in Belize, using trauma-informed narrative interviews. What is trauma? Some of us may have heard this word trauma before, and some of us may not have. Trauma can be defined as a series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotional harmful. This has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning in their physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Trauma is not the event, but the event experienced by the individual and their reaction to it. There are two types of trauma that are important to my study, which include big T trauma, also known as type 1 trauma. This is significant events, single events that are traumatic and unexpected, such as violent assault, mugging or robbery, death of a loved one, and so on. Type 2 trauma, which is complex trauma, describes trauma which is commonly experienced as a part of childhood, also known as adverse childhood experiences. This trauma is often repeated over time and is often a part of an interpersonal relationship, such as mother, daughter, father, son, and so on. Examples of this type of trauma are physical abuse, abandonment, neglect, domestic violence, and sexual assault, among others. The symptoms of trauma can be as unique as the individual experiencing the trauma. In this visual on the screen, we can see a few of the symptoms, including feeling unreal, chronic pain, anxiety, hypervigilance, and nightmares. Trauma and gang involvement. Research indicates that some trauma symptoms increase the risk for gang involvement. These include behavioral problems, aggression, emotional numbing, loss of sense of self, and depression and hopelessness. While trauma is not the only cause for gang involvement, it can increase a youth's risk for gang joining for a number of reasons. These reasons include gangs can offer a sense of safety, control, and structure, often missing in the lives of youth who've experienced trauma. Youth who've experienced trauma may find some success and belongingness and affirmation through the gang. The gang can also provide a place for youth to reenact learned patterns of behavior, such as violence or aggression, and gangs provide youth with basic needs such as food, shelter, and water, which may be going unmet in their family home. Now, moving on to gangs in general. A definition that I used in this study for what constitutes a gang is organized association of 3 or more people. Some gangs are formal, others less formal, but most share common names, signs, symbols, colors, as well as an area of the city or neighborhood. Members individually and collectively engage in or have engaged in criminal activity. Moving on to a little about gangs in Belize. In 2017, the IDB found that over 3/4 of the homicides were classified as gang-related by the police department and the GSU. And we can see that here on the screen. Only 36 murders in 2017 were classified as non-gang related, and 106 were classified as somehow gang related. A little more about gangs in Belize. Right now, there is an estimated 900 to 1,400 active gang members in Belize City alone. A unique factor found in Belize is that gangs are composed of minor factions that are smaller, not well organized, and mimic family groups rather than the large, complex organizations we see in other countries, such as Mexico and in the United States. Going on to an overview of my research study. The research exploring gangs in Belize is growing, except for one area. The research does not include women. This study was the first research study to look at gangs and gang-involved women in Belize. Because the numbers of general gang involvement and activity are increasing, we can hypothesize that the number of gang-involved women is also increasing. And with this, we can hypothesize women in Belize in gangs play an essential role within their gangs. My research included the life histories of the participants from before, during, and while leaving their gang. My research questions included what were the pre-gang experiences of trauma in the participants of the study, and what factors identified by the participants led them to gang joining. There were many other research questions in my study since it spanned the entire life of gang involvement, but within this presentation, we are exclusively focusing on pre-gang experiences of trauma. My study included interviews. I used in-depth life story interviewing with 4 women who engaged in 4 interviews, exploring their experiences from before, during, and after gang involvement. These interviews were conducted using trauma-informed narrative lens. This just means that the participants were in control of how and what they shared. This was so that they could share authentically in a safe environment without judgment. This research project also incorporated creative projects. These creative projects were participant-made expressions of their story. The participants were able to choose whatever they'd like to create for their story in whatever way they would like to create it. This component, like the interviews, was participant-led. The participants chose what form of art they'd like to use, what story they would like to tell, and what medium they'd like to share it in. This research study had 2 creative art projects, and 1 participant decided to create a song for their project. Now, participants in my study, I had 4 participants in my study that included women from the ages of 18 to in their mid-40s who were from 3 distinct fractions of the Bloods. In this study, there was the Gaza Bloods, PIV, and the Manatee Bloods. They were out of the gang from 1 month to over 20 years. Now, on to the findings of my research. The findings mirror the findings of the research studies from the United States and other Central American countries. Participants identified 3 significant push factors for them joining the gang, which included physical abuse, abandonment and neglect, and witnessing domestic violence. Now, these were labeled as 3 of the most significant sources and reasons for joining the gang from the women in my study. The first one, each push factor has a quote in the participants' own words, which I will allow the viewers to read while I speak about this specific push factor. The first push factor was physical abuse. Each participant reflected on experiencing significant amount of physical abuse in their home as young children. Through this quote on the screen, we can see that childhood physical abuse caused this participant to become less attached to her family, which then caused her to seek a replacement family and meeting her needs outside of the home. This push factor was identified in the interviews of all 4 participants. They all described physical abuse as being one of the leading factors that led them to seek acceptance and love elsewhere, leading them to the gang. The second factor was abandonment and neglect. Abandonment and neglect was found in the life stories of each participant. They all identified abandonment and neglect as a significant traumatic experience that became a push factor in seeking out and joining the gang. Each woman described feeling like they no longer belonged at home, feeling unloved, or like a burden on their family as a result of abandonment and neglect by their parents, which caused them to seek ways to meet their needs outside of the home. This is reflected in the quote on the screen from one of the participants. The final and third push factor identified as significant by the participants of this study was witnessing domestic violence. Again, all of the participants expressed that witnessing domestic violence was common experience in their household that caused them feel further disconnected and separated from their families. This quote from one participant skillfully reflects the effects that witnessing domestic violence had on her as a child. In this quote, she reflected on the aftermath of this violent incident, how she decided that the stress and anger associated with seeing this violence was too much for her to handle, driving her to seek ways to escape her home life. And eventually, this participant left her home permanently at the age of 10 to join the gang. These experiences and feelings associated with them created the need for the children to attempt to meet their needs, such as safety, acceptance, and love through other avenues, which included the gang. Moving on to the creative projects that were produced by the study and by the participants. Research has shown that nonverbal expressions such as art can help individuals further talk about their trauma experiences, especially in populations that experience significant stigma. And we all know that gang-involved individuals, especially women, experience stigma. On this slide, we can see one of the pieces of art that show the participant's story visually. This participant described drawing or painting the moment in her life where she decided that she needed to leave the gang. She's depicted in the middle with her hands up, asking herself, which road should she take? The road that led to out of the gang was labeled love, peace, self-esteem, and future. The road that showed her remaining in the gang was labeled hate, shame, destruction, and low self-esteem. The participant with her arms up describes asking herself this, which one should she take? She also decided to include a Bible verse that helped her, as she described, eventually leave the gang. The next participant decided to depict her experiences of pre-gang trauma in a song. She created her song lyrics. She expressed the feelings that led her to the gang. Highlighted in the song's lyrics are feelings of loneliness, being unloved, and uncared for. Now I'll let the viewers scan through the lyrics for one moment. The song really highlights these feelings of being uncared for that led her to the gang. The final project shown in this presentation today is a visual timeline of one participant's experience deciding to go to the gang, her experiences in the gang, and finally on the last panel, her turning around, leaving the gang, which, as you can see on the screen, led her to love, smiling, and happiness. So I wanted to include a quote from one of the participants about the meaningful process that she experienced while creating her art. In this quote, this participant reflected on her creative project and experiences making the artwork. She reflected that it helped her visualize everything that she's been through and appreciate and acknowledge the achievements she's made to get to where she is today, which was an active community member who is happy and healthy. So viewers may be thinking, I don't know any youth who is at risk of joining a gang, or I don't know anyone in a gang. So why does this matter to me? Childhood trauma has significant negative effects on adult functioning. Many of these issues we are still searching for answers today, such as cancer, diabetes, and heart attacks. Childhood trauma can cause an increased risk of HIV and STDs in adulthood, alcohol and substance use, and issues with obtaining and keeping employment later on in life. As you can see, childhood trauma has many significant and long-lasting effects. If we know that childhood trauma causes many of these issues later on in life, this will give us a better grasp on how to try to prevent and heal these things. Another reason why this matters is research from the United States and other Central American countries indicate that intervention and prevention programs for gang-involved men do not work as successfully in gang-involved women, which indicates the need to create programs specifically for gang-involved women. So, for future research directions, comprehensive first-hand information is an essential step in strengthening the country's knowledge of gangs. This knowledge will help then develop specific implementation, prevention, and intervention programs for gang-involved girls and women, and girls who are at risk for gang involvement. This research was a pilot study, which will then become a larger scale study in the future. I wanted to add this slide just in case any of the viewers may know a youth who may be at risk or who is currently gang involved. Get help, reach out, there is support. The information below all has resources for individuals who may need help with a youth who is at risk or gang involved. Viewers can email me at this email address at any time with any comments, questions, or feedback. Thank you to everyone who viewed my presentation today, and I look forward to answering your questions after this presentation or through email. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that presentation. Rounding up our thematic session on modern realities and urbanism, we have Mr. Nathaniel Castillo and Mr. Josue Ake. Nathaniel Castillo was born and raised in Belize. He is passionate about conservation and water quality. He completed his bachelor's degree at the University of Belize, where he was pursuing a degree in natural resource management. Furthermore, during this time, at the University of Belize, Nathaniel saw the effects of humans on the water supply, and through his bachelor's research, he inventoried and assessed the water quality of groundwater in the city of Belmopan. He also participated in regional and national seminars in water resource management, where he represented the University of Belize. Mr. Josue Ake is a lecturer at the University of Belize in the Natural Resource Management, Marine Biology, and biology programs. He researches in water resource management and environmental assessment, focusing on water quality within watersheds using environmental conceptual frameworks and environmental assessment tools within the realm of water quality management, that is technical, institutional, legislation, and financial. He is a local expert and investigator in water quality management, watershed management, integrated water resource management, and conservation education. Ending our modern realities and urbanism session, Mr. Castillo and Mr. Ake will present on the assessment of seasonal variations in groundwater quality in the city of Belmopan.
For attendance at this symposium for today, the 2nd of September of the present year. Today we'll be looking at the results of the thesis project that was done by Mr. Nathaniel Castillo as a student in the Natural Resource Management Program at the University of Belize. And I'm was his thesis advisor. I'm the lecturer at the Department of Science at UB. So the name of this presentation is the assessment of seasonal variation in groundwater quality, and was focused on the city of Belmopan. The layout of this presentation consists of the introduction, the purpose of study, the methodology, the results discussion, and that of the conclusion. Belize tend to be well blessed with water resource on an yearly basis, and the source for water comes from surface water, for example, rivers, streams, and also from groundwater, from aquifers, or from wells that are dug to get access to groundwater. No, water resource is used for agriculture purpose, for industrial purpose, and for domestic purpose. Now, within the realm of the domestic purpose, there is for drinking water and also for the use in the household by people. Now, in terms of this project that was focused on determining a preliminary assessment of the quality of groundwater via dugout wells, and this includes artisanal wells within the area of the city of Belmopan. So the main purpose of this study was to present the preliminary assessment of the quality of water to determine if there's a change within the parameters of physical, chemical, and microbial with seasonal change. These seasonal changes have to do with the dry and wet season that occurs here in Belize. You can see there on this slide the list of chemical parameters, the list of physical parameters, and also the microbial parameters. And for methodology, the flow chart there shows whereby there was the selection of sites, and this were the choosing of the wells, okay? And then we did the three types of assessment. Now, the physical assessment was done on site. The chemical assessments were done in the laboratory at UB. And then the microbial assessment was done at the National Water Quality Lab under the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And obviously, in order to get it before getting the samples to the lab, it had to be collected, right? And that was a tedious job that definitely Mr. Castillo, myself, and other students and volunteers participated in collection of samples. And then we went on to do the analysis, then reporting of the results, and then the recommendation.
Okay, everybody, so I will display the study map. So this map shows all the sample sites that were selected in this study. Previously, from what was assessed, we found a population of 45 wells. This is not all the wells that are within Belmopan. These are just the wells that we located based on time and resources. And given that this was what was known, we use this as the baseline to sort of guide this new assessment which was a continuation from an initial inventory. So from the total of 45 wells, we created a sample size of 18 wells that spread across the city of Belmopan. So areas that was involved in this study was Las Flores, San Martin, Salvapan, and Mahogany. And here you could see the different images from the wells that we actually saw at these different sites. The codes are Las Flores for LF, San Martin is SM, SP is Salvapan, and MM is Mahogany. So just to elaborate more onto the methodology that Mr. Raquez said, using the YSI to conduct physical parameters, we assess altitude, ammonium, conductivity, depth, dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, and total dissolved solids. In terms of chemical parameters, we assess chlorine, iron, nitrates, phosphates, and turbidity. In terms of microbial assessments, we looked at E. coli, total coliforms, and fecal coliforms. From the data that was collected, you could see here the physiochemical parameters for both wet season and dry season in the table above. And parameters that stood out to us, there were 6 parameters that stood out to us. So firstly, we're looking at total dissolved solids, where based on the WHO recommendations, you should have less than 500 milligrams per liter. And in this case, some of the populations within this study was significantly above this range, especially in the dry season. Another parameter that stood out to us was conductivity, which is measured in microsiemens per centimeter. And the WHO recommendation standard level for this is anything less than 400 microsiemens per centimeter. In this case, we had about 80% of the sample population above the WHO recommended standards. Following this was nitrates. The WHO recommended standards for drinking water is anything less than 5 milligrams per liter. And here we had 20% of the population in really high numbers. That is well above the acceptable limit. Following this, we had phosphates as well, where some of the sites were above the WHO recommended limits. The WHO recommended limits for phosphate is anything below 0.5 milligrams per liter is safe water. Another parameter that stood out was iron, where the WHO recommended limit is anything below 0.2 milligrams per liter. And here we had about 40% of the population well above this limit that was recorded. Lastly was turbidity. For this, only 20% of the population was above the WHO recommended limit, and WHO recommends anything below 5 NTUs is okay. So now looking at the microbial parameters, here you could see the results that we got. And because not all parameters were tested at the same given time, we had to go with recommendations from our friends from the Ministry of Health and Wellness Center to focus mainly on E. coli and fecal coliforms because these microbes share a positive correlation between one another. We did not focus on total coliforms because this is a parameter you would look at if it was treated water. However, we're classifying this water as untreated due to the frequency at which the wells are chlorinated. So here you could see that positive correlation between fecal coliforms and E. coli. So moving into how these microbes correspond with water quality parameters. You could see in the table above how E. coli has a negative correlation between nitrates and total dissolved solids. However, it does have a positive correlation within phosphates. So this means that if phosphates are present in the water, you will have a high number of E. coli. For fecal coliform, we have positive correlations for all three parameters, which is nitrates, total dissolved solids, and phosphates. So if any of these parameters are present, you will have a high percentage of fecal coliform present in the water. Now, we're moving into the physiochemical parameters and how these parameters change over time. So to assess this, we used a one-way ANOVA analysis to look at the p-values, and if the p-values are less than alpha, in this case that is 0.05, then that indicates to us that yes, indeed, there is a significant change in this specific physiochemical parameter over both wet season and dry season. So for this, two parameters stood out to us, and that is pH1, where we got a p-value of 0.01, which is less than alpha. So it doesn't indicate a significant change. And also dissolved oxygen percentage, which gave us a p-value of 0.04, which is less than alpha. And this indicates that, yes, there is a significant change within this water quality parameter over the two seasons. So in conclusion, this information is baseline data that could be used by the National Hydrological Service, the University of Belize, if there's any students who would want to further this study, as well as the Ministry of Health and Wellness, because the location, status, and the change in water quality of these wells are directly in the mandate of the National Hydrological Service and the Ministry of Health and Wellness. This is all needed in order to create an inventory of water wells for the entire country of Belize. So at least they have a head start in the city of Belmopan. Now moving into what we could conclude for seasonal variation, we can say that the seasonal variation has a significant effect on the concentration of certain parameters, as was seen through the analysis of a p-value. And in this case, both dissolved oxygen percentage and pH had a very big change during the change in seasons. Lastly, the results indicated that majority of the physiochemical parameters were within their acceptable limits, except for iron, total dissolved solids, conductivity, and turbidity. One last recommendation that we would want to give is that based on the high percentage of microbes that were in the water, it's our recommendation to do some form of pre-treatment if you would want to use the water for any domestic activities. Some form of pre-treatment is needed, and a cheap and effective form of doing this is through the use of chlorine. So we suggest that these entities should monitor the groundwater quality and assess occasionally to prevent any high concentrations of microbes to occur. So with that, everybody, we say thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. And that rounds up our first thematic session for this afternoon. Now we will move into the question and answer segment. So I will invite all of our presenters to come on stream, and we'll see what questions the audience have left for us. Hello, presenters. All right. Our first commentary comes from one of our presenters. So this says, I love this. It is great imagery through words, and that's to Chef Kuylen. So thank you very much to see that support from presenter to presenter. So Dr. Lyra, we're seeing some good mind energy here already. Um, I have a question about Belizean food. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Mennonite cuisine, Chef Kuylen, but the question reads as follows. I love this presentation. My question is, why do Mennonites not eat a lot of meat like the mestizos? So I'm not sure if you have a
Hi,
background in that, but hi, thank you for joining us.
thank you for having me. Great question. The thing is that I don't not only have all the answers, I have a lot of people that help me with answering a lot of things. I mean, when people, you all are doing research with having to do a lot of book work, and so I have people that I call. So if this question was for Mestizo Maya, any one of the I would always find the answer. I read the answer earlier and I hurry call one of my Mennonite friends, and the person says absolutely not, that Mennonites do eat a lot of meat, and especially pork, beef, chicken. They don't eat a lot of seafood, but they love potatoes and meat. She tells me beef, stew beef, and potato, sausages, a lot of sausage, and sweet potato, and farmer sausage. And of course, without Mennonites in Belize, we wouldn't have chicken, milk, rice, beans. So definitely, I don't think it's a fair statement to say that they don't eat a lot of meat. The only one that doesn't eat a lot of meat are the Indians, but not the East Indians. The real Indians who are living in Belize, they worship the cow now, so they only drink the milk. They eat ghee, the butter, and they are fairly vegetarians.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that insight. So, phone a friend, everybody that's networking, it works. We have another question for Sean Quillen. These are coming in the order of where they were when they were asked. So, the question is from Abner Racinos, and it reads, what are your thoughts on culinary cultural appropriation versus culinary cultural appreciation?
That's a wonderful question again, and I'm glad Dr. Lyra did it because, wow, cultural appropriation. I wish one of these days somebody accused me of that. I mean, I go cuss up because that would never happen in my case, no. But yes, cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation. I care to say that I culturally appreciate all of the people of Belize, the ethnicities and stuff. But great question, and I have two answers to that. A couple of months ago, Michael B. Jordan, not the basketball player, the singer, was accused of culturally appropriating because he decided to endorse a rum called Juve rum. And the country of Trinidad and Tobago lambastes the man because, of course, he's just using it for marketing purposes. Secondly, another example that comes up to me is Chef Jamie Oliver, very big chef out of the United Kingdom. He went and he made a rice called punchy jerk rice. Now, what the UK chef did make jerk rice, so Jamaica got up in arms and they really got upset about cultural appropriation. For me as a chef, I love to promote cultures and all the food of Belize. And sometimes I go to restaurants and resorts and you have French night, Italian night, Taco Tuesday with Mexican. I always pin that on its head, and I put, well, like if you hire me for a package for a wedding or stuff, my packages would be East Indian, Garifuna, And speaking of cultural appreciation, Dr. Lyra Spang and myself, we have a lady named Mama G out at Hopkins Village where we use a lot. And that's the only reason Dr. Lyra knows for Greta Coconut in a 6 acres, because even on her flyer and Placencia, when you're driving, you see a big face of Mama G there. But of course, that's not cultural appropriation, it is appreciation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Lyra, do you have anything that you want to add to that? I know her presentation wasn't on food, but she's a culinary anthropologist as well.
Yeah.
I think we may have lost Dr. Lyra for a moment. But yes, she can jump in with any commentary. So Dr. Lyra, if you are online, some of these other questions are for you, talking about the good mind and bad mind movement. We will move on to questions for our other presenter. Please do tell me how to pronounce your name correctly. But the
It,
question reads from Brian. Do you believe our government could create more programs for adolescents who live in gang areas to provide them more opportunities?
so my name is Kristcha Deguerre. You can say it however you'd like.
Thank
I
you.
say you can call me anything as long as it's not a bad name. So the government, our research in Belize, we do have research on gangs. My research is the first one on specifically women in gangs. So the research that does exist shows that Belize does and has had some really great programs, but the issue is funding with and long-term application of those programs. So we need to figure out how to retain funding for programs in the long term. Because we did and do have some great programs out there, but it's how do we keep those going for years to help as many as possible. Great question.
Perfect. We have a second question from this from Brianna again. Is female gang involvement increasing in Belize?
So, because my study is the first one to look at women and girls in gangs, we can't, I can't tell you yes, it is, but we can hypothesize that because gang involvement overall is increasing, that women's presence, women's roles, and women's activities are also increasing within the gang.
Wonderful. Thank you. I see Dr. Lyra has joined us, so we'll try to get some of our questions directed to you. Dr. Spang, this comes from our co-director April Martinez. So the question is, Dr. Spang, wonderful take on this idea. What was your inspiration for this research?
Well, I mean, you can't avoid hearing about bad mind in our society, unfortunately. It's something that if you go on social media for more than 10, 15 minutes, you are run up on somebody's post, usually complaining about those bad-minded people out there. Um, it's a powerful phrase, an important term in our society that really fascinates me because it doesn't exist in every culture or in every society. It doesn't mean bad mind doesn't exist. It just means that having an explicit, clear term to describe it, that's something that we find here in the Caribbean. And I always thought it was interesting. Okay, well, if you have this term bad mind, then obviously there must be good mind too. But why don't we have the term good mind? We are so focused on the negative with each other that we haven't bothered to come up with the term good mind as well. We have sick and healthy, we have, good and bad. So if we have bad mind, we must have good mind. But why don't we talk about good mind? So this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time because especially in our country, we're such a small country. We have a small population. Everybody knows each other. If they don't know each other directly, they know somebody who knows the next person. We're all very closely connected, and that makes everything personal. And when everything becomes personal, then it's very easy for it to start getting negative. But we could also be getting positive, and we choose instead to focus on this bad mind and not to talk about or introduce the idea of good mind. So a couple of years ago, I started using that hashtag good mind movement. The idea of being positive, peaceful, productive citizens, to be good minded. And that has to start with being good minded to your own self. Because if you don't really love yourself, you don't feel good in yourself, it's going to be hard for you to feel good about other people and what they're doing. Whereas if you feel happy where you are, then you can, appreciate other people's success and um, other people's happiness as well, and not take it as much as a threat. So, and everybody in their life goes up and down with that. But I think being a little more aware that we as a society, we're just like all human beings. So seeing all that talk about bad mind and people railing up on social media, getting all upset about bad mind, and I was like, man, like all this attention and energy being wasted on bad mind. When we could be talking about good mind, we could be acting good mind, we could be promoting good mind. If I had the money, I wanted to buy up all those Belize signs billboards and put like good mind quotes on every billboard in the country. That would be my dream right there. But instead, I take this angle because it's the one I have access to. And in order to talk about good mind, we have to understand why are we talking about bad mind so much? Why are we focused on it? Why do we have this term? And how can we introduce the equally important, if not more important, I would say, term of good mind? So it's something I've been thinking
Absolutely.
about for a long time.
Thank you so much for that question. And I think it was a really good segue into some of the other questions that are coming up, which are, asking how does a bad mind affect the work environment, or how does it affect the development of Belize as a nation. But I want to say very quickly before we move into those that I think your presentation is really the hinge that sort of brings in Krista's presentation and Sean Kuylen's presentation, in the sense that that idea of bad mind really factors into gang involvement, or at least how we engage with gang involved people. And I think one of the reasons why Chef Kuylen really resonates with Belizeans is because he brings that good mind to the table. So wonderful presentation and real hook for this thematic session. I'll just ask you to very quickly, Dr. Lyra, if you don't mind. We had a question and I'll bring it up. It says, how does the negative mentality or thinking of people affect the development of a country? And I'll add that to Estrella Emilia Rodriguez's comment of how can bad mind affect the work environment.
Those are, to me, kind of on two different levels. So when you're in a work environment, especially here in Belize, most work environments are relatively small. So you're talking about social interaction between three, four, maybe 10, 20 people. When you're talking about governance of a country, now we're talking about, going on 500,000 people in the case of Belize. And that's when we start to talk about structural inequality. Um, Bad mind, certainly, not to say that bad mind doesn't exist within the ministerial groups, right? So certainly, if we watch the news and we watch speeches, we watch what's going on with the National Assembly and how the politicians interact with each other, you can also see that sometimes they are very focused on the negative. They take things personally and they respond with personal attacks. This detracts completely from the point of having them in Belmopan to begin with, which is for them to, in theory, be serving all of us to create a better Belize by putting in place transparent, responsive, non-corrupt systems of governance, which we do not have at this time in most areas. And maybe all of this back and forth fighting, pushing and shoving that we see between political parties, you could say that some of that comes directly from this kind of personal, interpersonal conflict. And people certainly bring up that term bad mind in political speech making and in responses to the opposition party. So one politician says something negative, then another politician says a negative response or says, oh, you just a bad mind, my efforts and so on. And that completely takes us off of the focus, the important focus, which is to of course run the country. So I would say that it comes from taking things way too personally. And when we're working at a government level and you are a minister or you are the prime minister or you are a leader in your representative area, if you are allowing yourself to be dragged down by bad mind, you're not only not helping your own self in your own political career, you're not really helping us, because you need to stay focused on what you said you were going to do, because we want to see those results. And if you're busy just fighting with other politicians and talking about their bad mindedness, that won't get us there. So I would say yes, the attitude, when that focus on bad mind and that tendency to take everything personally and to lash out and to start fighting back and forth with, the battle of bad minds in Belmopan, it will not help us. So certainly if we are focused on being good-minded people, peaceful and positive and productive, then our country, when our leaders think like that, our country is more likely to be peaceful and positive and productive. So I would say, yeah, The individual belief that each politician carries to Belmopan with them does affect how our country is governed. And so if they would kind of let go of that tendency to fight between themselves and to have personal back and forth, then we'd probably be doing better. And the same for a work environment. Again, it's that crab mentality. It's that idea that, oh, well, if she to get more attention, for what she to do, and I to work twice as hard and and this and that. And, those are the kind of things that need to be talked about in a more open and direct manner. Those need to be brought up in staff meetings, but in a more productive way. We as a society, we are not good at communicating directly. We don't tend to tell people how we really feel. We use kind of this backhanded gossip, talking behind people's back way because we don't want to confront somebody else because we have this fear of confrontation. But the truth is, we can express our feelings without turning it into a potentially violent confrontation if we knew how to
Absolutely.
communicate. And
Mhm.
some of this is a problem that many of us struggle with, and it's not just in Belize, but I think as a society here in Belize, we do tend not to be as direct. Maybe because we're concerned about the repercussions, but sometimes we really need to come out and in a kind way, but a straightforward way, say, listen, in this work environment, I'm feeling some tension. I feel this way. I feel this way. How often do we say how we feel in a
Yeah.
calm way, in a calm
Yeah.
way to other
Yeah.
people? And so that ties into this bad mind is a way to express our frustration without doing so in a direct, constructive kind way. And so we tend to use that because that's what we know. So we can change that. That's the wonderful thing. That's why at the end of the presentation, I bring up that concept of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity to me is the great hope of humankind because we can actually change the physical structure of how our neural pathways function. If we tend to think negative, it's like doing a workout. If you want to be able to do push-ups, you start practicing, eventually you'll get enough strength you can do it. If you tend to think negative and complain all the time, you might think, oh, that's just me. I can't change. That's actually a lie. You can change, but you
Yeah.
have to do the work, just like going and exercising. And once you
Well,
start exercising your mind, you can create those new neural connections. So we can change how we think. We, as political leaders, we can also change how we think.
I think
We, as leaders of our country, we can change our country through changing how we think and having that have a ripple effect. And that's, my hope in a country like Belize. We have a
absolutely.
lot of power to do that. So I think if we could do that, that would be wonderful. I
Absolutely.
hope to see it.
I mean, I see your good mind movement already, like the hashtag already being shared. So we're glad with that. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lyra, for that commentary. I'll move on to one more question. This one is from Gabriel Hulse, and then so the question reads: do you think, and this is for the Krista Deguerre, do you believe? Do you think, sorry, that Belize not really having much of a formal approach to gang-related problems in general should take a more gendered approach to these crimes? Do you think it would be helpful from the macro perspective?
Great question. So just speaking from the macro perspective, we in Belize, we don't know anything about our gang involved women. So the first step would be to uncover this population before we can answer this question fully. But the research from the United States, Central America, and Caribbean does indicate that gendered intervention programs and prevention programs do help women better. My participants were even able to express to me feeling really left out and uncared for by organizations because they look around and they could tell me what programs were available for boys and men, but they said there's nothing for us. So first step, which is what my goal for my research is to uncover what is going on with gang involved women in Belize. How prevalent is it? What their experiences are. Then we can get a better, fuller picture of what gangs are fully in Belize. Because if we are ignoring a whole population of gang involved individuals, do we really fully know what gangs are like in Belize? So that's an overall goal for my future further dissertation study that this pilot study was the foundation for. And just to mention, I do see another comment coming in from YouTube, and I can reach out to that person with my email if they'd like to talk more about how to get started as a researcher and research in Belize.
Absolutely. We have a couple messages that we'll share with you that also came in on the back end, but we're running out of time for our question and answer segment. So thank you very much. We'll move on very quickly to a question for Mr. Castillo. This one comes from Angelique Celine Chan. Her question is, Mr. Castillo and Mr. Ake, what are your recommendations for future research on the topic, and how can authorities regulate the groundwater resource so as to make it safer for those that depend on this resource?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and specifically with the groundwater resource, because there has been work when it comes to surface water, in terms of monitoring here in Belize at the major watersheds. Here, to answer this question, we have to continue. I am right now. I'm with the other topics that the other presenters were responding in terms of changing that mindset. With me and what I started doing from 3 years ago is to change that mindset of working in groups with various people with multiple disciplines, right? And working with government, the partner, we have to approach it in working together. How can we work together to achieve the common goal? And that's the approach for future research, in that it does just people that are just with water resource doing the work, but other people that, for example, sociologists, chemists, primary education people, to come together and create that, or continue doing that work in terms of protecting groundwater, because we're already living in the future, for say, in terms of having the water scarcity in a small country like Belize, and that's my recommendation, that it's a matter of, first, the mentality is to work together. It doesn't matter if you don't have the background or if you have the other mentalities. It's coming together to work together to achieve that common goal, and that common goal is to maintain that quality of water, both as in the groundwater and also as it is in surface water.
Absolutely. Again, good mind. Mr. Castillo, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a bit on that. If you would want to further this study, the resources are there. It's just more of forming different partnerships that have already been established, but it's just to sort of dip your toe into the water to say that, yes, I would like to take this up. And I do see the potential for this. A lot of the different agencies are handicapped to actually do the work. So if you know somebody or yourself would like to take on a challenge, all the people there at the University of Belize, such as Mr. Ake, they know all the right people that you need to know. And for sure, they could definitely sort of hook you up to get into the research and what's not. But yeah, in terms of the governmental overview of everything, I think one of the main thing that needs to be done is a full inventory. So then you could know exactly what there is to regulate, because there's a lot of things on paper that says, hey, this is here. But then when you actually go in the field, on the ground, yeah, there's nothing.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that commentary, and it's great to hear that from early career researchers from Belize. So with that, we bring to a close the question and answer segment. There are a lot of good questions in the comments, and we're really, really sorry that we were not able to get to all of them. I will ask the presenters if they could please, reply in the comments, sort of address some of the things that came up there. Really interesting questions. Climate change, the use of the wells, thoughts on latrines in Belize and how that affects groundwater variability, the climate change and how that is going to affect some of the data that you see and what your expectations or predictions are. So please, presenters, if you don't mind, check out those comments and leave your reply there. I'm sure the Belizean people would appreciate that commentary from you all. And with that, we bring a close to this session. Chef Kuylen, Mr. Deguerre, Mr. Castillo, Mr. Ake, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for presenting at the first Belize KULCHA Symposium. We hope to make it annual. So hopefully see you there next year, sorry. And yes, so thank you very much for that. And we'll close the session now and move into a coffee break. Thank you. We'll be back at 2:30.
Ivory.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our last session for today. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for the Culture Symposium Day 2. We really appreciate you, our audience, for being here. We will jump into our last session for today. So, our thematic session is Belizean literature and folklore. Um, so now that you have all been revived and fully caffeinated, hopefully in that very short coffee break, I am pleased to bring to you a little bit of culture to the Culture Symposium. A little bit more, I should say. So, this session is all about literature, language, folklore. Our presenters will be discussing the artistic forms of storytelling in Belize, capturing both Kriol and Yucatec heritage in the presentations this afternoon. You get a little bit of that taste of that from Chef Kuylen earlier. So we're going to segue into that entire thematic session this afternoon. Firstly, I would like to introduce Mrs. Felicita Cantun, our first presenter for the session. So Mrs. Felicita is a Maya Yucatec living in the community of Yo Creek in Orange Walk District, Belize. In 2005, she retired from the teaching profession and after serving for 40 years. After retiring, she tutored teachers all over the country. At present, she is the president of Kanan Miatzil, Guardians of Culture. That's an association whose main objective is to keep the Maya Yucatec culture alive. She works with children, youths, and adults. She is also the founder of Ekbalam, the Maya ballgame Puck team. They are Mundo Maya champions, and with the youth with whom she works, she includes traditional Yucatec and pre-Hispanic dances. With the children, Miss Felicita also does work on pre-Hispanic music and hand embroidery, and focusing on women groups, she does traditional foods. Miss Felicita Cantun is a Maya priestess and performs weddings, baptisms, the sacred fire ceremony, energy cleansings, and promotes the use of traditional medicines. So we heard from the Garifuna sisters earlier. Miss Felicita Cantun does similar stuff as in terms of spirituality for the Maya community. She is also known as a Pachamama, or she also owns, sorry, Pachamama, a farm where close to 100 species of medicinal plants are found in their natural habitat. In the words of Miss Felicita Cantun, I love myself and love what I do. We welcome her presentation on beliefs on Yucatec Maya folklore characters Tata Duende, the Llorona, and the Xtabay.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the time where you are. I am Felicita Cantun, a Maya Yucatec from Belize, a promoter of our culture. Today, now, I will talk about beliefs on Maya Yucatec folklore. The Mayas have preserved many aspects of their ancient culture, including their traditional clothing, folklore, family structure, language, dance, and included in there is the pervasive machismo culture. Maya men were taught to be strong and resilient, to not show emotions, to man up, never to feel afraid. Whenever a baby boy would be running and he would drop and he would cry, mother and father would say, no, 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 you don't cry, you're a boy. Boys don't cry. So this machismo thing is practiced from very small. Now, before there was history, there was storytelling. In the times when no electricity or modern technology was available in my community, we used to gather at nights or during our pastime, tell or to listen to stories which were passed by word of mouth for centuries among the Mayan. These were important experiences in their real life, and they were able to craft them into narratives. These stories were used as a method to teach ethics, values, and cultural norms and differences. These were the best of times. Some of these stories include Xtabay, Tata Duende, and many more. I will speak to you about Xtabay. what I learned from my ancestors, from my from the older folks. Now, Xtabay is known to be a beautiful, enchanting, and charming woman with long black hair who lures drunken men, especially drunken men, to follow her. And she uses her unlimited powers to seduce them. Different people give different versions of the Xtabay. One legend tells of two girls fighting over a boyfriend. That is one man and two women, the love triangle. We see it all the time in the movies, on TV, and unfortunately, in real life. One of the ladies, determined not to let anyone get into her way, gives the other girl a magic drink, a love potion that awakened her sexual appetite. So, showing no shame because of the drink she had, no shame, she would go into the arms of countless men. By and by, she fled into the forest and took the form of the Xtabay, who would lure men and sometimes kill them if they cannot satisfy her heightened sexual desires. Some describe her as having the feet of chicken, the legs of a chicken. This was related by a face-to-face to me by one who had this experience. I will change his name. I will name him as Pedro. Now, this man, Pedro, from a nearby community, he was always bragging of not being afraid of anyone. He related that once he had a date with a young girl during a dance in honor of the patron saint of the community. So anxious to meet this girl, he went ahead of the time agreed. And remember, it was night time. And it was at the times when no electricity was in the community. So as he approached the place, he saw the form of a woman under a big bullet tree. So he did not wait for anything. He hastily went to meet her. And as soon as he reached where this beautiful woman was, instead of bidding her good night or how are you, first thing he did, Pedro, guess what? First thing he did, he shoved his hands under her skirt to feel her leg. But what he felt made him feel scared. He felt bones, no flesh. And the girl grabbed him on the neck and started choking him. So he was not unprepared, he was prepared. He took out his deadly, long and double-edged dagger and stabbed her several times, and he managed to escape. The following morning, feeling a little bit ashamed, he told his brother, he related to his big brother what happened to him the night before. And he asked him to accompany him to the place where the incident took to the place of the incident. So what they saw was his dagger stuck on an isote tree. This is a tree that bears bunches of lovely white flowers. And from that time on, Pedro no longer claims to be a macho man, and he advises young men to keep away from lonely, dark areas, to respect young women, and especially to keep away from these dark areas where they might meet the Xtabay. So from that time on, he shows respect to young women. So as I mentioned before, the story of the Xtabay is used to teach, to pass on values, to teach ethics to youth and to adults. When you come to Belize and you visit Pachamama, I hope you don't encounter the Xtabay. Tata Duende now. Tata Duende. Please click on Tata Duende. Is one of the most popular and well-known folklore to both characters, folklore characters to both young and old in the tradition of the Maya Yucatec. According to legend, these Tata Duendes are very, 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 very old. And they are considered to be nature caretakers. Tata Duende is acknowledged as the traditional guardian angel of all the animals and people of the forest. And he punishes avarice hunters that kill more game than they need. Game like deer, armadillo, different animals found in the forest which we, Maya Yucatec, use as food. Now again, just like the Llorona, sorry, like the Xtabay, there are different versions and variations of Tata Duende. Some describe him as a short man, more or less like 3 feet in height, wearing a big, large, distinctive hat. Some describe him as having feet backwards and would be upset when he sees you with your thumbs, since he's missing his own. He loves to ride horses and would braid their mane. And I personally have witnessed this one. I did not see the Tata Duende braiding the mane of one of our horses, but we had one horse that no one could get close to him except my father. He was the only one who would feed him, give him water, take him to the stable, take him outside. And one morning, when he visited his table, we all of us saw his mane neatly braided. So I believe that is true. And also, it is said that he is recognized because of his distinct whistle. I remember, again, when no technology, no electricity, at night, my mother would be rocking in the hammock and telling us stories. And one night we heard a whistle at night. And we said, "You hear that? You heard that?" All of us who were there heard that whistle. But then my mother said, "That's the Tata Duende. But don't be afraid. We heard it very, very near. So that means he is far away." So his whistle is that if you hear the whistle near, he is far. And when you hear it far, he is near. Oh, and he loves cigars. Tata Duende loves cigars. So we would always, as an offering, we'd always leave tobacco cigars to him. This mischievous little spirit would love to play pranks. Like I said, he would braid the mane of the hair of the horses. So Tata Duende is known as a mischievous maker, also known for having a special interest in children, luring them deep in the woods. Therefore, the Tata Duende has been used to scare children into behaving well. The Maya Yucatec asked permission from Tata Duende before entering the forest and before entering hunts. And there is also a special ritual for offerings to the Tata Duende. So again, just like the Llorona is used in the Maya Yucatec culture to instill values, ethics in both youths and children, also the Tata Duende is used. There are times when mothers would say to their misbehaving boys or girls, if you continue behaving bad, the Tata Duende will take you away. So children would be obedient to parents, or they would tell the children, "You see, it's dark. You should not be wandering on the streets. Make sure you're home." So children would make sure, even though we do not have curfews at that time, they would make sure that they're at home before night falls. So these stories, our stories, are not just stories to be told and to be heard. They are stories that are used to instill. They were stories passed by word of mouth and used to teach ethics, values. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful presentation by Miss Felicita Cantun, and sort of relating a little bit to Gerardo Polanco's presentation from earlier this morning. So interesting aspects of Yucatec Maya culture, folklore, and how that factors into our society. Next, I would like to introduce you all to Miss Ivory Kelly. Ivory Kelly is the author of Point of Order, Poetry and Prose and Pengering, a collection of short stories in English and Standard Belize Kriol, her mother tongue. Her works also appear in journals and anthologies in the Caribbean, the UK, the US, Mexico, Brazil, and Belize. In 2018, she was the winner of the Copal Distillery Fellowship at the Belize Writers Conference, and in 2017, the third and second place winner of the Belize Literary Prizes in the poetry and fiction categories, respectively. She currently teaches in the Languages and Literature Department at the University of Belize and is a founding member of the Belizean Writers Guild. For more information, visit her website at www.ivorykelly.com. Our second presentation for this thematic session is Ms. Ivory Kelly discussing the writer as a cultural activist, 100 years of Kriol usage in Belizean literature.
And first of all, I must say thank you to the Heritage Foundation Network Belize for this wonderful symposium and for all of the work that you do in promoting culture in Belize. And greetings as well to you viewers. Thank you so very much for taking the time to view my presentation. Today, I will be sharing a sort of survey of Belizean literature, highlighting those writers who have used Belize Kriol in various genres between 1920 and 2020. My presentation is titled The Writer as a Cultural Activist, 100 Years of Kriol Usage in Belizean Literature. And I'm going to share my screen with you briefly just to show you a snapshot of some of the writers whom I will be referencing. And so who we have here in this snapshot are James Martinez, Milton Arana, James Eliot, Colville Young, Evan Hyde, Z. Edgel, Leroy Young, Kieran Gabriel, Keisha Rodriguez, and myself, Ivory Kelly. Some of the Belizean authors who have used Kriol in some notable ways, in rather extensive ways, over the past century. So now, by way of definition, what I mean by cultural activism, to borrow Buechner and Arnold's definition in their article titled Cultural Activism in the Community, it is an intermingling, cultural activism, an intermingling of art, activism, performance, and politics that includes engagement with a broad spectrum of creative practice as a means to challenge dominant ways of seeing and constructing the world. In post-colonial Belize, the dominant imperialist cultures that have pervaded as a result of our colonial history and today's geopolitical realities have been British and Anglo-American cultures. Therefore, we will see that from the earliest period of Belize's literary development, our writers have challenged British or foreign dominance, even though they may not necessarily have done so consciously or referred to, use the term activism to describe their subversive writings. Two of the ways in which Belizean writers have challenged the status quo and asserted their cultural identity are through their choices of subject matter and the use of their mother tongues. These include, to varying degrees, Spanish, Garifuna, Belmopan, Maya Quechua, and Kriol. And this presentation focuses on the Kriol language and its deployment by Belizean writers as a form of cultural activism. We begin with a poem published in 1920 by James Martinez. Written in Kriol, the poem is titled The Jazz Band and was published in Martinez's book Caribbean Jingles, which was one of the earliest literary publications by a native Belizean. If you attended primary school in Belize in the 1980s or before, chances are you learned Martinez's very popular poem, Success of Life. In this poem that I'm going to read now, titled The Jazz Band, the speaker is describing his first encounter with jazz. And I am going to share my screen with you again so that you might read along and see the Kriol usage in the poem and are able to read along if you wish now. So let me just share my screen. So I trust you're able to see the text on the screen of Martinez's The Jazz Band. Oops. Okay, good. All right. The Jazz Band by James Martinez. I've been to listen lately and hear the jazz band play. And goodness me, my nerves, they nearly bust. They kick up such a squabble and they make such lot of noise. I never hear such instrumental fuss. The instruments ain't many as in the regular band, and to look at them you never would suspect that the polished looking cornet and the slim and neat trombone could ever raise such row as what they make. First, the clarinet starts squeaking some notes of discontent. Then the bass begin to bellow out a few. And the trombone join the chorus with some slow discordant sound. And the drum begin to beat a brisk too. And the row is now quite heated and they have a big dispute as if they're going to end up in a fight. And the cornet starts bleating and the bass commences to roar and the trombone blasts and howl with all his might. So they quarrel and they squabble and they scream and screech and howl till they drop into a kind of stifling groan. And you wonder, as you listen, what is going to happen next? Then you hear the trombone give a dying moan. And so you sit and listen till your head commences to swim and you feel yourself like you're going to drop. Then you hear an awful squealing and another startling sound as the cymbal make a clap for them to stop. And so the tune is finished, if tune it really was. And the instrument is put aside to rest. And you feel your nerve a throbbing and your head a aching hard. And you think to get some quiet is the best. The Jazz Band by James Martinez. Martinez's Caribbean Jingles, wherein that poem is contained, was, as far as the research indicates, the first Belizean publication that uses Kriol extensively. As an aside, Martinez was not a Belize City Kriol as one might have expected or suspected, but a Garifuna from Toledo in the South, which is a lovely irony that deserves its own presentation. I'm sure you would agree. But Martinez was one of the very few prominent poets prior to the 1970s who embraced Kriol. Others in that small fraternity included Milton Arana, James Eliot, and Colville Young. Most of the other leading writers of the time, poets and writers of the time, did not write in Kriol at all, even though most of them were Kriols, and the majority of the population at the time spoke Kriol as a first language. This is prior to the 1970s. Because, as you know, those were the oppressive colonial days when Kriol was regarded as bad language, bad English, or a corruption of the English language. And school children were beaten for speaking in Kriol and other indigenous languages in school. And so, no surprise then that only a few of our prominent writers were embracing Kriol as prominently as did Martinez and Eliot and the others that I'm highlighting today. So now, at this point, I will read an excerpt from Colville Young's folk drama, Riding Hearts, which was written around 1970 and later published in the 1998 anthology Penguin Jukme, 6 Belizean Plays. Widely performed in the 70s and 80s, Riding Haas is a superb depiction of one of Belize's popular folk characters, Bra Anansi, or Bra Hanasi, who is half man, half spider. Anansi, who originated in West Africa, is a popular folk character not only in Belize but throughout the Caribbean, and he is a trickster. In the Colville Young play that I'm going to read the excerpt from, he uses his brain in the absence of brawn to outwit the powerful Bra Tiger. And again, I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the text in Kriol and read along if you please. All right, an excerpt from the opening section of Colville Young's Riding Haas. Kriol people say, when man no got nothing to do, it got a savannah go tell cow morning. So now this the one time long before you and me dream for barn, and as you feel idle and you make up your mind for mischief. And as it gone the woman tongue, straighten the spectacle, look all wrong, quimp and the gal there, fresh as ever, and boast to the crowd by Belize River that he know how to ride with whip, with spur, stick in a saddle like any burr. The gal them giggle and shout out, "Cha, you think them like with a fool we know? All we bandays be willing for bet, and as it never set eye upon bridle yet." Bra Hanasi, he start to row. It begs till it puff up, here and now. On the top, they like piam in the grass. Tiger, that for me father, best riding horse. So there we have some of the opening lines of that delightful folk drama by Colville Young. Now, in the 70s also, Evan Hyde published extensive works in using Kriol, including the play Hard Time and his brilliant memoir, North American Blues. Similarly, Z. Edgell, especially in her first novel, Becca Lamb, published in 1982, utilized Kriol very effectively. And then in the 1990s through to the second decade of the 21st century, poets like Irwin Jones, Leroy Young, Kieran Gabriel, and other spoken word artists have been throwing it down and writing it down in Kriol, sometimes fully, sometimes partially, talking about how life hard out here. And Belizeans can't stand the pressure, but their only resort, it seems, is to call the talk show. Publications from these poets include Irwin Jones's popular Ghetto Food, published in 2007, and the 501 Spoken Words anthology, Poetic Narcotics, which was published in 2019, and recently volume 2 of that anthology was released as well. So you can look out for these texts and enjoy these exemplars of Kriol usage in our literature. Throughout these years, however, the versions of Kriol utilized in our literature up to the early part of this 21st century, by and large, have been acrolectal and mesolectal Kriol, versions that are close to English. And this has been the trend among contemporary writers in the Anglophone Caribbean in general, who wish to reach a broader reading audience in English, while retaining our unique Caribbean, and in our case, Belizean voice. But then in 2007, a monumental development took place here in Belize when the Kriol Council published the Kriol English Dictionary after years of work developing a spelling system that made it possible for Kriol to be written in a standardized way. And publications directly spawned or enabled by this development of the standardized spelling system have been the Kriol Council's own weekly column, Wewegafise, published in the Reporter newspaper, as well as Belmopanonline.com. The New Testament translation by the Kriol Council as well. And then there is an extensive body of religious literature, as well as music and movies produced by or translated by the Jehovah's Witnesses in Belize. We also have had literary works by poets and authors such as Colin Hyde, Keisha Rodriguez, and her colleagues in the 501 spoken word group. And those poets I have referenced earlier: Kieran Gabriel, Grandmaster Lee, Grandmaster Young, and others. And an increasing number of political and public service advertisements countrywide. Finally, about my own use of Kriol as a fiction writer. In 2019, I published the short story Stillborn in English, Stillborn, in a bilingual collection of stories titled Pengering. Stillborn was originally written in English and co-translated by myself and my colleague and friend, Sylvana Udds. And so in this opening scene, I'm going to read you a very brief excerpt from. We meet Diana, the protagonist, who is originally from Belize, but is now married and living in the United States. She has just received an email from her first child's father after 14 years of estrangement. So I am going to share again my screen with you so that you can see the text in standardized Kriol. Diana stared upon the email subject for a good while. I think it should have deleted it. It stayed there for a while to contemplate it, but then it changed its mind. Deep breath, nice and steady. It sat up straight in the dining chair and clicked the email open. For 22nd April 2016. Dear Diana, I know I broke my promise. I'm sorry for the intrude. I get your email from the Chapel Hill website. To tell you the truth, I don't even know why I write. But I guess I may want you know that I write a letter to one every year for my birthday. I go to mass, light one candle, then I come to my office and write to one. Now that it would have turned 14 this year, my birthday they come, I find myself to think about that even more. I imagine that the play sports, all in me and elbow to stick out like my one day when I am at that age, LOL. And full of light too, I bet, because surely he know I inherit your 100-watt smile. Forgive me for the bare my heart like this. I don't want to take up more of your time. My best to your family, Omar. P.S. I really did love you, Diana. Okay, so there you have the opening, a short excerpt from the opening scene of Stillborn, written in standardized Kriol. And so now, here we are in 2021. Even as we continue to grapple with this global pandemic, we have much to celebrate. Not only the use of Kriol in Belizean literature over the past century, but we likewise celebrate and encourage the use of all our indigenous languages in our literature. Granted, these are still few and far between, but I am encouraged by events such as this Kulcha Symposium and conversations that I know people have been having, like my colleagues at the University of Belize who talk about aspiring to offer language courses in Garifuna, Maya, Kriol, etc. And I urge the Ministry of Culture to prioritize literacy and literary publications in all our mother tongues. In closing, I'd like to thank the staff of the National Heritage Library here in Belmopan, and by extension, the National Library Service and Information System for assistance with access to some of the texts I referenced, especially the older ones that are no longer in circulation. I'm also very grateful to the National Kriol Council of Belize for the extremely important work they continue to do in promoting literacy and literary publications in Kriol, and to all our cultural activists, present and past, on whose shoulders I stand. And of course, thanks to you for taking the time to view this presentation. And if you wish to connect with me, you may do so at my email address, ivorykellybelize@gmail.com, or my social media link. My social media handles are Ivory Kelly Writer, both on Facebook and Instagram. I go by Ivory Kelly Writer, or you can contact me through my website, ivorykelly.com.
Thank you for that very informative presentation, Ivory Kelly. We move on to the final paper for today. I would now like to introduce Dr. Christopher DeShield. Dr. Christopher DeShield is an assistant professor of English at the University of Belize. He holds a PhD in English literature from Malaya, an MSc in literature and transatlanticism from Edinburgh, and a BA in biology and English from Goshen. Dr. DeShield's research interests lie in the intersection of post-colonial literature and the environment. He regularly presents research at local and international conferences and is a member of the Post-Colonial Studies Association, the Association of Study of Literature and the Environment. And with Gerardo Polanco, who we heard from earlier today, he recently published an article on Z. Egel's The Festival of San Joaquin. That was published in Ottawa, Canada. We welcome our final presentation for Day 2 of the Culture Symposium, Dr. Christopher DeShield introducing James Sullivan Martinez's Mahogany poems.
Good afternoon, Culture Symposium. My presentation today is the start of a larger inquiry into the historical record, engaging scholarship, economic, anthropological, and literary that might feed efforts by myself and my colleagues to further develop modules in Belizean literature we currently offer at the University of Belize. Additionally, my presentation emerges out of a recognition of loss provoked by a visual archive. I think we have all seen pictures of trees in mahogany camps a century or so ago, massive trees dwarfing the proud tree fellers that stand before them and who topple them. Now this is a feat of industry, but I think we feel the loss of ancient trees. Where I live in the village, some might look at my yard and perhaps uncharitably label it bush, but I love it. After looking at so many images of felled trees wandering around Belize, you wonder how many massive ancient trees might there have been that have been taken away from us. I'm still grappling with timber shipping statistics and narratives of export fluctuation that are collected in such works as the Boa Thomas's Economic History of Belize. But I find the question resonant. Where are all our ancient trees? What results when our enjoyment of these trees, their inimitable influence over our psyches and physical environment, is taken from us? And this is how I find the work of James Sullivan Martinez interesting. Here is a poet and lumberjack who is representing his everyday experiences through a particular mode of cultural expression, poetry, infusing local experience into imported styles, creating something new from borrowed modes. This is the crucible of culture. The Belizean poet James Martinez is significant in Belizean literature for his collection Caribbean Jingles, Dialect and Other Poems of British Honduras, which was published 100 years ago. His book represents possibly the first published collection by a Belizean. Martinez also acquires regional primacy with his collection because some of his poems are written in a dialect of his own vernacular, placing him in a constellation of the earliest Caribbean poets to do so. The seeming significance of this national primacy and historical achievement belies the fact that early work such as Martinez's is often dismissed in Caribbean literature as being of little literary merit, accused of being either imitative or amateurish. The Routledge Reader in Caribbean Literature, for instance, notes how critics dismiss early figures of Caribbean literature, Martinez's contemporaries, as being, quote, almost exclusively historical in interest. That's Edward Bow. With specific regard to James S. Martinez, Alan MacLeod notes in his 1982 assessment of Belizean literature that Caribbean jingles, though, quote, amateur versification of a low order, might still be an important source for those studying so-called paleo-literatures of Belize. An evocative, but perhaps ultimately deprecating term for assessing a poet. While critics are correct in that a major source of interest in Martinez has to do with its historical significance, it is notable that the references to his work span diverse fields of study. His work is of interest for those studying Belizean literary history, but also for Kriol versification, for political and economic history, for anthropology, as it offers poetic illustrations of historical cultural practices, even ecology. Rachel Graham includes a poem of Martinez's in her dissertation on shark conservation. All this indicates Martinez's work is amenable to transdisciplinary approaches and, I argue, indicative of its general significance and value. More recently, and in my own field, Megan Casey argues in her 2007 dissertation on culture and nature in Belize how Martinez's use of the vernacular connects local language with local knowledge of the environment. Even more recently, my colleague Ivory Kelly has suggested a tradition of Kriol language poetry by positioning Martinez as a literary forebear in his deployment of Kriol as a literary language. What unifies these diverse approaches to Martinez's work, whether they lean critical or celebratory, is a recognition of the superiority of the vernacular poems over the mawkish and imitative Victorian-style poems in Standard English that would have been outdated even then. In Martinez's time and earlier, an interest in local flavor literature resembles that in South America for costumbrismo and the trend for dialect and poems in the black vernacular tradition in the US and in the UK. I speculate that Martinez's poetic performance is negotiating demands of authentic representation and expression, but also the limitations that inherited genres impose on meter, style, presentation, and form. Martinez's work invokes a complex of forces attendant in the local population that are legacies Belizeans ought to retrospectively engage. His poems might inspire introspection and interrogation of our attitudes today. In this way, the complex negotiation that goes into creating a poem that draws on diverse imported and indigenous styles might be seen as an allegory of the complex negotiation which goes into narrating Belizean, Kriol, and national identities. For this presentation, I placed thematic focus on Martinez's Mahogany poems. These have historical and general interest, and they span the two general styles I mentioned earlier, that imitative standard English style and also a vernacular, itself imitative of dialect poetry by figures like Paul Laurence Dunbar in the United States. I should note that Dunbar, for example, admitted to feeling a racist pressure by critics to stick to writing, quote, jingles in a broken tongue. So while there has been interest in Kriol poetry, the motivations behind that interest vary considerably through time. There are 3 Mahogany poems within Martinez's published collection: Fos Lagde, Sub Umbra Floreo, and The Felling of a Mahogany Tree, of interest to the historically minded who may wish to compare colonial portraits of British Honduras log camps with portraits produced by fellers and laborers themselves. Consider first this prose tableau of camp life from the Colonial Office report presented to shareholders of the British Honduras Company Limited, which is the precursor to the Belize State Company. In 1867, the writer declares that all this activity and exertion, so ill corresponding with the silent hour of midnight, makes the process of trucking or drawing the mahogany to the river wear more the appearance of some theatrical exhibition than what it really is, the pursuit of industry which has fallen to the lot of the Honduras woodcutter. End quote. The colonial discourse here treats the work of the laborer as if it has fallen to them by divine chance, rather than as a result of an exploitative regime of colonial enterprise. Of course, similar discourse is at play in other parts of the British Empire to justify a schema of racially determined labor. Regardless, the colonial eye recognizes some pageantry and ritual in the labor that the poet and laborer Martinez also recognizes and captures in his verse, in his poem Foslag Day. Consider the fourth stanza here. The drivers and the loaders days men that's rated high, but the men who cut the cattle field is only just small fry. So when the foreman give out shot and cap at Foslag Eve, it's just the drivers and the loaders who these gifts receive. Martinez's poetic account relays the process as an insider might reveal ethnographic details of camp life, the substrate from which an original culture or newness emerges. He borrows the versification of standard English poetry and employs a dialect of his own creation that sprinkles in unique culturally specific words like Benk, Broku, Bon, Wari, and Amadili. And though treating the same subject, Martinez's poetic version refuses to adopt the same colonial discourse. The Belize Honduras Society report surveys the laborers of mahogany extraction with a racialist philosophy born of color prejudice. We might approach Martinez's poem seeking a substantive difference between the subjectivity of the imperialist promulgating the discourse of colonialism and the colonial subject himself navigating it. How similar are their views of the world and the work of logging? In Sombra Floreo, Martinez enumerates workers' specific tasks in contrast to the colonial report's intimation of animality in marveling at the laborers' instinctual prowess. Both poem and report employ the metaphor of royalty to describe the mahogany. Both describe the tree as giant, though Martinez recognizes the price of the giant's felling in that the money is secured, whereas the colonial account renders the value more generally in abstractions of progress and industry. In Martinez's poem, the process of extracting mahogany is set out, though it elides the act of felling itself. It might be possible to read some embarrassment or sadness in the elision, but Martinez offers great detail of the difficult work of felling a tree in another poem titled The Felling of a Mahogany Tree. While it is possible to locate nuances of subjectivity and perspective in his poetry, Martinez's work here ultimately serves colonial designs on the land. The work itself, occasioned by the patronage of Lieutenant Colonel James Cran, who encouraged Martinez after reading his poems in the local papers. Indeed, Martinez fulfilled Cran's special request to write a recruiting poem called Call to Duty, meant to arouse the consciences of quite a few to their, quote, responsibility and duty to their king and country, and to stimulate them to take an active part in the fray, end quote. Further, Martinez takes up the customary colonial cringe that Richard Wilk has theorized as a colonial dilemma of identity expressed even through poetic genre. Post-colonial writers, Lloyd Fernando, George Lamming, for example, describe this phenomenon of colonials weighing themselves as wanting on an imperial scale of their own design. Martinez presents his work to the public with no pretension to exhibit any great learning or profound thought, it's a quote. He denies his book is meant for great learning and states that his wish to treat commonplace subjects and to depict chiefly occurrences in our community and in our daily life, end quote. Here I find valuable Melissa Johnson's anthropological work in her book, Becoming Kriol. Johnson theorizes the Kriol subject in continuous formation while negotiating multiple entanglements. In their use of vernacular, Martinez's poems express an independent subjectivity bound up with legacies of exploitation and participant in larger competing designs on the land by various indigenous and colonial entities. His poems signify in the midst of this confluence of political and economic forces. The portrait of the Kriol subject that emerges from Martinez's poetry, we inherit. For some of us, we are peering into our own subject formation and identity, even more generally as Belizeans. Now, even if figured primarily as Kriol identity, the entanglements that Melissa Johnson and others enumerate include intersections with indigenous concerns. The mahogany logging operations Martinez describes are implicated in the removal of indigenous peoples from land via the Belize State Company timber concessions. British Honduras Company mahogany crews would trample milpas. Contractual agreements between colonial governments and indigenous farmers were made exchanging items for promises to, quote, respect the mahogany. The same respect is perhaps articulated by Martinez in his ironic coronation of the tree on the occasion of its felling, while ostensibly providing a perspective of camp life from below. Martinez's Mahogany poems suggest a complex locus of competing and sometimes contradictory interests. The poems navigate discourse around colonial resource extraction and the cultural emerging therefrom. At turns playful, celebratory, and elegiac, Martinez's poetry evokes nationally significant sociological and ecological arrangements. Drawing on the language of Melissa Johnson, the poems reveal a specific set of entanglements intrinsic in extractive capitalist economies that rural Belizeans have been negotiating from colonial times to present-day tourist-based economies and land use schemes. I note that James S. Martinez's poems are collected in this one manuscript we have. There are references to his poems appearing in early newspapers, the Belize Independent and the Clarion. During my initial search at the archives and in preparing for this paper, I noted that the specific issues of the newspaper containing the bulk of Martinez's serialized poems is missing. Copies of the 1920 issues of the Belize Independent were not available in the archives. And until I complete further sleuthing, I hypothesize they no longer exist. Missing. Much like the trees cut down for export in earlier decades of our Belizean past, these first instances of the poems are missing from the landscape. So we have this parallel of loss, an archive of loss. If I were to position James Martinez as an important figure in a tradition of Kriol literature, I would do so invoking this complex of nostalgia, celebration, cultural growth, but also violence, opportunism, oppression, and loss. And finally, if you will indulge me, I will share a poem provoked by this inquiry and inspired by James Martinez's act of creation. And I think it appropriate to draft it in a contemporary literary Kriol of my own vernacular. I see this picture the other day with a big mahogany, so broad 8 man stand up front and still can't touch the size. One other one they chop and the circle of the tree could have fit in a whole house. The mahogany got man like ants, the fire bite with the iron saw. They try catch the tree off guard. High and mighty, the mahogany then look up with praise. Then long arm raise up out of the sky. The tree then it dance one slow, slow dance when nobody I can understand. Like on top the spin along with the whole world. Which part I could find a tree that size? I watch the picture like and take away the tree from me. Now who care they make the picnic and can't see one ancient tree that Belize? This is our history. History carry tree. If we history, that the throne of England. If we history, that one armoire. That cabinet over that side. That safe, that ship, that chair. If we history, the house on a fine library. Somewhere. Which part we history there? Out there so? Or right here so? If that's so, can plant some leaf seed now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeShiel. Thank you, Ivory Kelly. Thank you, Ms. Felicita Cantun. Thank you to all the presenters for this afternoon for your wonderful, wonderful presentations. This day has been like the presentations that keep giving. We have that wonderful prose by Chef Kuylen. We have had Alexander Evans creating a musical composition for the symposium. We have had Christopher DeShiel, Dr. Christopher DeShiel creating poetry for the symposium. So it has been, we are so grateful to our presenters and to the attention that they give to the delivery of their presentations and to the cultural history that they are building, both through their own works and through their participation in the symposium. So I will now invite first Dr. DeShiel to the stream and Ms. Ivory Kelly. Welcome both of you. We have questions coming in for the two of you. I'll start off with some from, well, just a commentary first. Ms. Diana J saying beautiful poem, Dr. DeShield. And we'll jump into some of the longer ones, and then we'll bring Ms. Felicita on if we have her for her questions. So the first question for Dr. DeShield is from Ms. Kelvin. She reads, Dr. DeShield, can the negative criticisms be the reason why we have a greater wealth of Creole literature, but not a large reception from the Belizean public? Can we say the harsh remarks of those critics were somewhat successful in pulling the wool over the eyes of the Belizean, so to say, in efforts to assert foreign literature dominance?
All right. Thank you. Thank you for those remarks, Sylvia. Thank you all, and thank you for this question, Ms. Scott Kelvin. I think both Ivory Kelly and myself addressed similar this question in different ways. I suppose the contribution my presentation makes to addressing this idea of a negative reception is that there are various responses to Creole literature, right, by various parties. So I gave a quote from Paul Laurence Dunbar, an American poet who was writing in a Black vernacular dialect in the United States. So that's the context of the United States. And it appears that he was pushed to do so precisely because they were trying to position Creole or various dialects in the United States as somehow inferior to the standard English poetry, right? So that was a motivation or that was a push for him to continue writing in the dialect, but for, I would say, racist reasons, right? That you are limited in this realm and you can't explore other places. So that's a strange position in the current day. And the positions in the current day that contrast that would be the celebrations of our Creole heritage that you saw, for example, in Ivory Kelly's presentation. And the reason I included that poem at the end of my presentation is precisely that I wanted to take some inspiration along Ivory Kelly's lines of positioning Martinez as a forebear and create something new out of that. And even locating Martinez in this confluence of exploitation, mahogany extraction, and all of this colonial extraction that was taking place and exploitation in Belize's early history, there's some newness and some culture emerging there in various areas. And so I see that as something to celebrate, to promote, to disseminate, and to inspire further cultural activity in Belize there, right? So there must be a current that is looking at these things harshly. I think Ivory Kelly had addressed that somewhat, right? The kinds of discourses that play for especially older generations growing up on how to talk. I think I even have family members that still subscribe to these kinds of philosophies, right? But we want to contrast that in contemporary cultural production. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for those commentaries, Dr. Dishes, and of course your poetry, Ivory Kelly's books. We see it happening, and I'm happy that we have students in our stream and people who are actively engaging with that. Before we move into sort of the more contemporary discussions, I wanted to address maybe two questions that are a little bit more in the historic narratives and archaeology rather than literature, but perhaps you can take on some of these, Dr. DeShield or Ms. Kelly, Ms. Ivory Kelly, if you have any commentary as well. The first question is there any specific backlash the authors received for writing in Kriol in the early years? I'm not sure if that has factored into the historical records, any at all.
I don't know if is that directed at Ivory? I take that one. I could answer comments.
Directed to any of you, I guess, but maybe your presentation because it's more of the historical, the mahogany works and poems.
Okay, well, I could start with yes, as I mentioned with Martinez, especially in the introduction, one way of approaching the preface to his book was to look at it as a kind of a positioning of himself on some kind of colonial scale. Now, this is common in a lot of poetry. If you look at the prefaces to a lot of early poetry, the poet will kind of humbly suggest that what they're putting out there may not deserve, scrutiny and all of that, and they're not pretensions to reach for something great. So there's a tradition there, and you try to position yourself humbly, and then you wow them, with the quality of your culture, your product, right? So that's a whole trend that goes way back. I think there's even a word for it, sprezzatura, where you pretend you don't have any skill, and then you sit down at the piano and boom, you really show off, and it's part of your performance. So there's that's present in the preface. But there's also, I think, a little suggestion of that measuring oneself as inferior, right? So you have some kind of scale, and the whole colonial system is such that you position these colonial administrators and like in their culture at the top, and then you intentionally put yourself somewhere below, right? And there's some scholars in Belizean literature and anthropology, I'm thinking here of Richard Wilk, who have theorized that, and then they're trying to figure out, where do we fit in this whole colonial culture? How can we position ourselves on this ladder? Because you're trained to think about these colonial cultural products, right, as being somehow exemplary and untouchable and could never get there. So I think those twin forces are there. On the other hand, Martinez's work had a patron. So he did get support from the community, right? Writing in the newspapers. As I said, I wasn't able to find all of the newspapers in which he was published. I still have research to do in the archives, but there was obviously some support there. Actually, one of the newspapers I read, someone had plagiarized his work. I think this was in the Clarion of 1920. Someone had presented one of his poems, and then he responded and said, I wrote this poem 2 months ago, and he should consult me before he decides to revise my work and all that. So there's obviously some kind of complex engagement with people both attacking the use of the Kriol, but also celebrating it for various reasons. I think that's how I'd approach that.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Miss Ivory? I believe you are. Could you unmute Miss Ivory, please? Thank you. There we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you indeed. Thank you for that question, Ashanti. And by way of responding to that question, I think although I did not find any specific references to repercussions that befell any of our early writers for writing Kriol, I can surmise that there was a hesitation, and there must have been some kind of sanctioning or hesitation on the part of the writers to do so, because prior to the 1970s, as I mentioned, the number of writers who were engaging with Kriol in meaningful ways, or in relatively extensive ways, was a very small handful of writers, very small. And so likewise, if you were to survey the earliest anthologies of Belizean poems, those published in the 50s and 60s, you will see that the first 3 publications that I was able to find had not even one word in Kriol whatsoever. And I tallied about 170 poems published in Belizean Poets Volume 1, Belizean Poets Volume 2, and Poems of British Honduras. Those were 3 of the earlier works of poetry. And I tallied 170 poems total, and of those 170 poems, not one was in Kriol. It was not until later when we start to see Colville Young and others publishing their works showing up in anthologies. And I'm talking anthologies that were sponsored by the government. The arms of the government. Specifically, I think the Ministry of Education was one of the sponsors, and other government arms. And so this absence of Kriol in the earlier publications, I think, speak to a sort of lack of embracing or official embracing of the language prior to the 1970s. So yeah, that's, I think, one way of looking of it, the omission, rather than, overt reprisals. It's a matter of, what didn't happen. What was the, what were the reasons for the hesitance, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for that commentary, Ms. Ivory Kelly. It's a good thing we are going so far as to make those changes. We have another commentary that could probably factor in for the both of you. So the question reads, it's from Alejandro Martinez, and it reads, as a writer or for those aspiring writers out there, how important is it to stick to the roots of our culture and the Creole language in our literature? Would you still engage in writing about topics as these if it is met by negativity? Any of presenters can tackle this one.
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you so much for the question, Alejandro. I, regardless of what subject matter or what medium or what language you pursue, so long as you're operating among your audience is human beings. People have their divergent views about just about anything that we do, including our art. But as a writer of fiction and a keen lover of Belizean culture, and somebody for whom identity is very important, I don't think I have any choice but to continue to write in Creole, in my mother tongue, and to encourage all of our writers in all genres to likewise do so, because writing in and becoming literate in our mother tongue, some people describe our mother tongues as our heart language, as our soul language. It is the language in which we are able to connect with the deepest levels of ourselves, as who we are as human beings, to celebrate who we are and be proud of that. It is a matter of self-esteem, how we esteem ourselves as individuals. I talk so, this is how I sound, and it's beautiful. And when we embrace that as Belizean, Garenago, Maya Mestizo, Maya Yucatec, we are building individually our esteem as well as collectively our national esteem. And so I think as artists, as writers, we owe ourselves and our nation that duty to continue to develop and celebrate our culture in our literature.
Thank you. Dr. DeShield, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, yes, I fully subscribe to Ivory's comments there. I think it's true that, if you're worried about negativity, there will always be people, contrarians in society. Look at any subject, somebody is going to take some opposing view just because, they want to be contrary to the thing. You see that all the time. So if you rely only on that kind of external reception for getting inspiration for writing your poetry, it's probably not advised. I think I would also echo the comments of an earlier presenter. I think it was Franz Smith talking about artists, visual artists in Belize. And I heard him mention that you should seek out some communities, small communities of like-minded individuals. Not to be doing exactly the same thing, but you're supporting one another, you're building that community in order to create markets on one hand, but also support one another in terms of inspiration and the like. And in this day and age, I've heard, sadly, many people complain about how you don't get celebrated by your own compatriots, that sometimes you're not welcome in your own home, so to speak, right? But in this day and age, you have recourse to communities all over the world. And it's indeed the case that Belize has something very special to contribute to the global languages and culture. And you can find communities out there that will sustain you there if, sadly, you cannot find an audience at home. But that's not the case in Belize, because we can see more and more how these things are received very well, right? So definitely stick to it and engage that writing in that tongue, right?
Absolutely. And if you'll allow me as well to add on behalf of the organization, Alejandro, I believe that Heritage Education Network Belize is one of those platforms or like-minded communities that Dr. DeShield just referenced and Frank Smith earlier. So in our symposium, for example, to really bring forth that inclusivity, we had options for people to present in their native language, whether that be English, Spanish, Maya. We had committed to finding volunteers to provide that translation if the presenters were not able to present. And what we want to see is that more of that inclusivity of our mother languages in these academic spaces. And we don't only mean presentations that speak about them, but presentations that are delivered in our mother tongues. So we're here, we're a like-minded community, and we're all about networking, as our name says. So reach out to us, reach out to the presenters. Moving on with our questions, we have Gerardo, Manuel Palanco. His question reads, Dr. DeShield, I see some parallels between Martinez and Wilson Harris in both their experiences working in the forest, influencing their writing. Are there any connections between their lived experiences and their writing?
Oh, wow. Now, that's a lovely question there. I'm ashamed to say I didn't really think about those kind of connections that are obviously there. Because Wilson Harris was a surveyor in the interior of Guyana, and that really influenced his own aesthetic sensibilities, his exploration there, and he's written extensively about that. Sadly, we don't have much written by Martinez about his craft in his own hand, right? So more exploration have to go there, but seems like a very interesting line of inquiry that I'd be excited to pursue. You know, thinking about it's kind of phenomenological. You know, you think about how your world around impacts your writing, and that's definitely the case for Martinez. The subject of his poems have to do with that experience in the interior, in the hinterland. He's depicting it, and it's I think that's a rich area for inquiry. We only have those poems, but there's a lot there that you could work with still, even in that archive. So thank you for that suggestion and that question.
It sounds like we're going to be hearing about a future written collaboration between the two of you. So we'll look forward to that.
Part two. Yeah.
Part two. Let's see, other questions. We have some questions. We have a question for Ms. Ivory Kelly from Ms. McNabb. So it reads, Ms. Kelly, Belize has many talented writers that are capable of being great writers. My question is, do you think that if Belize was more known and they had a better platform to reach the people, could they be successful?
Thank you for that question, Ms. McNabb. I am an eternal optimist, so I would venture to say that we do have the platform, we do have the resources. The world is wide open now. As Dr. DeShield mentioned earlier, alluded to we have the opportunity now to expand our reach beyond our borders, and the conditions of the pandemic have underscored even more so those possibilities and opportunities. And so when we think about our audience, as Christopher mentioned earlier, we need not think about just the Belizean readership. There's a whole wide world out there that is very interested in this kind of culture and mother tongue literature. And so, for example, I can point you to an example of, you look like a very young person from what I see of your profile photo. And so I'll use as an example of this Belizean young author, Nia Authors, who is doing a wonderful job of utilizing Amazon as a platform for marketing and selling her romance novels. She is an excellent romance novelist. She has been navigating very successfully the world of commercial fiction. And it's a great example. Look her up. NiaAuthors.com is her website, and she's also on Amazon. Has published more than 80 romance novels and taking full advantage of the opportunities available by technology to you all who were born in the technology age now. So absolutely. So it's just for us to continue. And I'm going to say, especially those of us in education, including Christopher and I, who teach at our national university, to continue to inspire our young people. And a culture symposium like this one will go a long way in joining us in showing our young people that the sky is the limit. At UB, we have 3 creative writing courses, and we do expose our students to the opportunities to publish and to reach the world within and beyond Belize. So I think we're on the right track, Ms. McNabb, and thank you for your encouragement by your interest. Yes.
Absolutely, thank you. We move on to another question by Gerardo Polanco. His question reads as follows. Ms. Kelly, do you see the possibility of an anthology that would compile these texts in one book? And what do you believe this would mean as a contribution to a Belizean literary canon? Sorry.
I assume you're referencing the Kriol literary works that I surveyed. That would be a wonderful project, and so yes, indeed, we have, as my colleagues who teach literature at UB are very keen to point out, we have yet to fully define our canon. It's very much a work in progress, and a publication as such, Gerardo, I think would be an important foundation toward helping us to define our canon. So yeah, great idea.
Wonderful. A question from Hilary Sib. It reads, I like the point made that these folklore characters make. They instill ethnic and morals in the past generations. Would you say that the practice is still shared till this day as a form of discipline, I believe? So this one is from Miss Felicita Cantun, and we'll try and add her to the stream right now and see if we can get her to answer that question. Hi, Miss Fel, can you hear us? Hello. Hello, Miss Fel. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Miss Bell. Can you hear us? Hi.
Yes. Up to this day.
Wonderful. Thank you
The
for joining us.
characters in the stories are used to instill the ethics up to this day.
Yes.
Especially with the Mayas in the north. These stories are still told, and especially the parents do use it to instill into especially the young children, morals such as be kind, or don't stay out at night very late, obey your parents, be respectful to young women. It is still being used, and it's still used to instill the ethics and the morals as it was used a long time ago. Yes.
Wonderful. We have another question, Ms. Bell. I'll read it for you. It says, do you think telling these traditional folklores in today's time have lost its effect to teach ethics and values? Do you think it's lost?
Now, as I believe with the new use of technology, Facebook, WhatsApp, and everything, and especially the teenagers, they would say, I don't believe in those things. Just like in the stories, they would say, I don't believe in those things. But whenever they listen to real accounts of people facing or having had encounters with these characters, most of them do say, okay, yes, most of them. Okay, I'm talking about the youth in my community. Since we still live in a small community, not just maybe 3,000 people living in that community. So these traditional folklores haven't lost effect because as a storyteller, when I am telling these stories, even to adults, you can see the expression in their faces. You can see that they do believe, especially when we tell them, okay, this was related to me by such a person still living at this time. He had this experience. So it is still used in my community. We still use it to teach ethics and values. Yes, we do.
Thank you, Miss Bell. We have one final question for you. If you allow me, I'll read the short version of it. It says, my question is, do you think that these folklore or these stories change due to the fact that someone tells the story wrong, or that different religions have different beliefs and perspectives about this folklore?
Like in our case, for example, the Tata Duende or La Llorona, there are different versions. There are different versions of it. But the teachings, the moral of the lessons is still there. It does not matter which version it is being told. And yes, the religions have had lots of influences in our stories. For example, most in my community of 2,500 people, we have about 8 to 10 churches. Even though each church would have about 15 followers the most, and they do have an influence on our culture and traditions. But as I said, there are different versions of each story. For example, the Tata Duende, different people will have different versions of the story. La Llorona, different people will have different versions. But what is important in these stories is the values, the morals behind each story is the same. So I think our stories are still used as that. And if we would have the stories recorded, documented, even written, so that it's not only what they hear, but then what they read, it would have more impact on the youth and on the children. So I think one of our tasks, our gigantic tasks, is not to just retell it as how we learned it from our ancestors, from our grandmothers, from word of mouth, but to document it and have it written so that anyone in the future can have access to these stories, and so we can continue to teach morals and ethics and these things that are fast. We are losing it, but then something has to be done so that we can continue to have this for our future generations.
Thank you very much for that response, Miss Fel. Miss Fel, you are live and on the call. You have people in the literacy world in Belize. So when it comes to writing, these are the people that need to talk to. So let's hope that there is a future collaboration between you guys, between all of us, because we're talking about the intangible cultural heritage. We're talking about oral histories. We're talking about literacy, its role in representation, the importance of building up literacy in Belize. So I'm seeing the multivocality of culture and all the intersectionalities that are occurring here. So wonderful, wonderful discussion. And with that, presenters, we do have to pull up close to the question and answer segment because we are a little bit over time. But thank you very much for this engaging question and answer segment. We have had a lot of commentary on the Facebook thread. So I asked the presenters, if possible, could you please go back and maybe take a look at the comments if we were not able to address all of them for time sensitivity reasons? Please humor us in engaging in the Facebook commentary or leaving a reply. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for staying on and rounding out this session. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Miss Bell. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, our viewers, we move to the end of day 2 of the KULCHA Symposium. And what a day it has been. We've had music, we have had steel pan, poetry, we have had everything from groundwater, seasonal variability to literature and folklore and poems. So what a wonderful, wonderful session we have had. I now call Miss April Martinez, co-director of Heritage Education Network Belize, to deliver the closing remarks for today. Miss April Martinez.
Thank you, Miss Sylvia Battier, for that wonderful moderation that you did this afternoon. And thank you to all our viewers here today. I think that we brought the culture today. We definitely did. And I specifically have a little list, if you will humor me before we leave. Thank each and every one of our volunteers that have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you this wonderful symposium. And we hope that you continue to stick around for tomorrow. We also want to give a shout out to the national channel for airing us on both on their Facebook page and on their cable network, bringing the symposium to those that do not have wireless internet at the moment. And a big shout out also to Colorblind Multimedia as well for airing us on their Facebook stream as well. We cannot thank you guys so much for engaging with Heritage Education Network to bring forth this symposium to life in order for everybody, both here and far, to talk about culture and to understand culture and to engage in culture. I want to say how grateful Heritage Education Network Belize is to Miss Rita May Tala, our inspirational keynote speaker for today. We thank you so much for joining us live from Paris to bring us your keynote address. I believe that there was so much to learn within your speech, and I think that once we replay your speech again on our YouTube and our Facebook, that the rest of the audience that missed it will definitely find it inspirational as well. We also want to thank our panels today, our presenters today, for their time and their efforts in bringing forth this presentation and for joining us in the live question and answer segments. We thank you so much, Mr. Frank Smith, for talking to us about artless economic transitions. I think that your presentation definitely spoke to a wide range of audience, especially our young upcoming artists that want to understand how they can create their art and um, make it profitable for them as well and engaging for their communities. Big shout out to Mr. Alexander Evans for discussing the history of steel pan. That was a very, very engaging conversation. A lot of our audience was very much engaged in that. And I also want to give like a small snippet for the music that was in his presentation. He made his music specifically for Heritage Education Network Belize in that presentation. So thank you so much for that. We move on to our Decolonizing Belizean Identity panel. Thank you, Gerardo. I keep saying his name wrong. Gerardo Polanco. Thank you so much for bringing us insight on decolonizing Yucatec Maya folklore and spirituality. I think that the topic of decolonizing Belizean identity is something that is people talk about it on social media and so forth, but it's wonderful to have insight with a lovely presentation such as what you provided for us here on in our symposium. Um, Big shout out to Kaylee and Stefan Cayetano for that wonderful presentation on podcasting as a means of cultural preservation. I think that everybody depend on phone now, and I feel like if you don't want to subscribe and understand Garifuna spirituality, you just don't want because their podcast is everywhere. And guys, you have to watch it. It's lovely. Thank you so much to Miss Alicia Andrews that came to us all the way from St. Vincent for this presentation and for the Q&A. She definitely gave us a lot to think about when it comes to how we see education within an academic setting with her the Garifuna University Without Walls presentation. And the presenters that wrapped up our decolonizing identity, Mr. Andrew Habet and Gabriel Hulse. Honestly, that presentation got so much feedback in the comments by our Belizeans because I think that whenever we see Belize in the media, we tend to be like, oh my gosh, they said Belize, but then we don't look at the cultural stigma and the way that Belize is actually being represented on the media. So thank you so much for that lovely presentation. It was wonderful. And our afternoon segment was also very much engaging. Thank you so much to our presenters. Chef Sean Kuylen, I have no idea how you made me sit here and visualize food while you were talking to me on a screen, but that was awesome. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much to Dr. Lyra Spang for her presentation on Bad Mind, Good Mind. It gave us a lot to think about, especially with her new movement, hashtag Good Mind. So if you don't know about that now, you know now, right? Definitely. Presentation number 3, Miss Kristcha Deguerre. I got that right. Kristcha Deguerre. Talking about her gang involvement, trauma and resiliency in women in Belize. I think that this is something not necessarily spoken about. People don't really want to talk about it because it creates a lot of stigma and a lot of taboo in our society. But thank you so much for bringing forth that kind of conversation into our symposium. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much to Mr. Nathaniel Castillo and Mr. Josue on your groundbreaking research of the assessment of seasonal variations in groundwater quality in Belmopan. I live in a Belmopan, so that may kind of important for my knowledge. So I will definitely be reading more about your research, and hopefully you guys have a second part to that research coming soon. And I would lastly like to thank our final panel in the Belizean literature and folklore section. Thank you so much to Ms. Felicita Cantun for that inspirational presentation on folklores of the Maya Yucatec. While listening to your presentation, I started to think about when my grandma used to tell me, no, go back a bush. you know, cause it Duende and get you. And I think that a lot of us grew up with these types of stories, and it's very insightful to hear it coming from someone that understands the roots of that folk tale. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much to my wonderful colleagues from the University of Belize, Miss Ivory Kelly and Dr. Christopher DeShield, on your Belizean literature presentations. I think on a never talk because on an overlap, right? But it was wonderful. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you to all our presenters, and thank you to our viewers for sticking with us all the way through the very end, and for really and truly engaging in this culture symposium. Please come back tomorrow. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, April. And I'll just have you stay on stream with me as we close because we don't have much more to go. So you have heard it from April. Thank you to everyone, our presenters, our viewers. We really, really, truly appreciate it. And we do all of this for you to be that platform of inclusivity, to be that network, to be that like-minded community, as was mentioned. So thank you. And with that, we bring the second day of the Belize KULCHA Symposium to a close. We will see you all bright and early, 8:30 a.m. tomorrow, Friday, September 3rd, for day 3 of the KULCHA Symposium. Remember, donations are welcome and are accepted. You can go to our websites if you want to support financially the KULCHA Symposium and the free access of information. We are a volunteer-led organization, so your donations do go a long way in ensuring that that initiatives like this can be held, and that they can be held for free for all Belizeans. Remember, all of these presentations will be accessible on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, and on our website, and it's all free and open source information. So any students, any interested persons, you can all access our information on our variety of social media channels. And on our website, we are now also on TikTok. So we're really trying to hit that accessibility, everyone. Thank you again to our media partners, Colorblind, for having our stream up, and for the national channel having our stream up on their Facebook pages and on their cable channels. So if you can't catch us tomorrow on Facebook or YouTube, catch us on Colorblind, catch us on cable. And with that,
no way you can know about culture. There's no way you are
there's no way.
Yes.
And with that, I say thank you. Good evening. See you tomorrow. Make sure you did it. Goodbye.